All right, good evening, everyone. I'll say welcome back, but we're really welcoming you for the first time to the October 7th regular meeting of the Hopewell Borough Council. Because council met in executive session with our attorney on a couple of topics at 6 o'clock, we already did our roll call and the flag salutes. We're starting right in at item 5, which is the public session for the meeting tonight. Council, in our packets, we had reports from the Director of Public Works and Water and Sewer. Normally ask if there's any questions for our administrator, because he's on vacation, he's away from the office this week. Perhaps I'll decline to ask that, but if anyone has any comments or questions, perhaps we can get them out now. If not, we'll get them answered offline. All right. Next, we've got item 7, 3 discussion items, and those are kind of permanent placeholders for some announcements and discussions by council. The first item, an update on potential sale of our water system. Our next task that we'll likely see, our professionals are working on the RFQ, or request for qualifications, to see if there's any parties interested in having a discussion or responding to what's called an RFP, or request for proposal. So the steps that we look at, we're looking at about a year's worth of work, more or less, hopefully a little bit less, to be able to have someone essentially at the table to understand whether there's interest or something to present to the community about a potential sale. Water team's also been particularly busy this month, overseeing both leak mitigation efforts and repairs. One embarrassingly right directly in front of my house, though that was, I'm happy to say, not my fault or responsibility. It was right next to my my connection, and some work towards looking at the future of our water. I'll say tower, but the distribution reservoir. Thank you. David, anything you want to add to that?
One of the, we're waiting for the DEP to send us a grant agreement. This is for the federal grant that's administered through DEP for the treatment systems for PFAS in well number 4 and PFAS and arsenic in well number 6. That's kind of the next stage in this process, to actually get the grant agreement and review that, and at some point execute that agreement, and then actually starts the ball rolling on the process of initiating the planning and design for that system. So that's the next stage in that. That's all.
Thank you. Next discussion item for council, I'm going to turn it over to Councilwoman Milenius to lead on, but our town has had a really great history of volunteers and participation in the Women's Space December event, Communities of Light, and Heidi has taken the lead on that in recent years. And want to give us an update and talk through what this year might look like?
So basically, for those who aren't familiar, what Women's Space Communities of Light lights up. Women's Space lights up all over Mercer County, but I do believe this actually happens much further afield than that. It is the first Monday in December, and businesses and residents like Campbell's, but there are, and we have in Hopewell Borough, we've just had a group of volunteers, of which I was one of the organizers, and we've had a small event at the Old School Baptist Meeting House, and we've had volunteers kind of light along the cemetery, but we haven't ever had really the official involvement of the borough in this process. And I thought it would be really nice now that I'll be honest, I'm on council, and so now I kind of wanted to help us make this more an official borough event, to give you some context in the rest of Mercer County. The following municipalities host something just generally outside their municipal building, so like their front steps, their front yard, their parking lot, whatever. Ewing, Hightstown, East Windsor, Hamilton, Hopewell Township, Princeton, Robbinsville, Trenton, and West Windsor all host something at their municipal, outside of their municipal building. And Lawrenceville holds something in the park. And so for us, the options are kind of the front of Borough Hall, which I think is a very nice look. That would be my recommendation. But if we didn't want to do it at Borough Hall, the other possibilities would be the train station or the gazebo park. But I think if everyone's in agreement that it would be nice to have more of an official presence as a borough, I would love to do that. So,
Is there a date yet
yes.
officially? Just so we
It
can
is
put on our
the
calendar?
first Monday in December, so that makes it. So it must be December 2nd. It must be December 2nd. Yes, it's on my calendar. It's community
All
life.
right.
There it is.
Excellent.
So do we want to?
Sounds like
Is
we.
the front steps, is that good for
Sounds
folks?
like it.
Because, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Excellent. And I guess we'll look for more information as it comes.
Yeah, I will reach out to Women's Space, kind of make it official, and then obviously everyone will be invited, and we will also put the banner back up. To remind people to light in front of their houses and all that as well.
Okay, excellent. The next and last of our council discussion items is a form or process for temporary street closure applications. I met about a week and a half ago with some business owners about what the process might be to, block off parking spaces or, for special events. And as it turns out, from talking to our administrator and the police, that there just really wasn't. I saw in your packets kind of a form and a bit of a process that would run through our administrator.
I didn't see the
No?
process, I just saw the form.
Okay, well, that's,
Yes.
there's that.
Yeah,
And ultimately, the administrator, PW, Public Works, and the police department kind of work together and kind of screen things and make sure the neighbors and businesses were, knew about it and things like that. So I guess it's time for feedback on that before there was a goal to get it live. There's a couple of things happening early next month where there might be even competing events. It'd be good to have a system in place by early November, but I guess informal feedback both now and if not, perhaps to Doug in the next couple of weeks on how we should handle that.
This is perfect
Yeah.
timing because Beth Judge just reached out to me about the handmade Hopewell and closing off the second block. There was a lot of upheaval last year because the neighborhoods wasn't, alerted.
Yeah.
And things like that. So this formalizes the process. She was asking me what the process was. So
We will.
Could not be
we will
better
soon
timing.
have.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is this commercial or can this be like, I wanted to?
Like a block party?
I think it would apply really to, there's kind of an informal process. A few streets do have block parties and just kind of ask governing the administrator or PW for it. And it kind of works this way informally, and the
Right.
Public Works will kind of vet it and bring sawhorses or something like
Center
that.
Street,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
And
yeah.
unfortunately, I live on
Yeah.
a street that can't be closed.
Right.
So
Yeah.
there was no,
Interesting, you try.
have to break a water main for it to happen, or have a parade.
Didn't work.
Neither of which are in my control, but.
Yeah.
So more or less, I would think it would apply really to everything, whether it's a special event, or, a block party or, a
Great,
community
yeah.
event like that, would all kind of make sure that it got to town hall. And then it would be kind of orchestrated with the local folks and the police department as well, and with Public Works having some kind of official, Hopewell Borough said it's okay,
So
Yeah, I guess,
stanchions, I think, to use it.
I was gonna say, so for Henry and Hopewell, who's responsible to speak to the neighbors on a particular block? Like, if I was closing 7th Street, I would walk around and tell people, but if
No, I think that'd be up to our administrator to
to direct.
Yeah.
to direct,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think it
Yeah.
should be for like a big community event, perhaps there could be some assistance, but it's not, I don't think it should be handed off to you know, our staff to,
No, no, no,
So if the parking is gonna be limited, if this is forwarded to Hopewell Township Police, they would put signs up in advance.
right, and I would
Yeah,
imagine that.
and-
like they do with the
Yeah.
parade or something.
Yeah, so actually, I mean, I'll be honest, when I first saw this on the agenda, when it said temporary street closure application form, I assumed it was like block party closing, like formalizing that, because I also live on a block party block.
Yep.
And somehow when I looked through the whole thing, I didn't actually see this application for establishing a temporary no parking area until later this afternoon, because, you know, sometimes when you're flipping through all those pages digitally, you miss one. I do think it's something we definitely need to do. And I think it's a good step to formalize it, but I think it is a big deal. And so because if you're talking about blocking off, you know, Center Street or West Prospect Street, to be honest, none of us really care. Like, you know, okay, have a block party. But if you're regularly gonna be restricting parking in front of businesses, I think that is gonna be a much more charged issue. And I just think it's something we wanna have the process very clear. I think we need to have a public discussion. So I don't see this as something we could have formalized by November, because I feel like we need to have the public discussion about it. And it is something that seems, you know, if we're gonna have rules for how you can actually create a legal no parking spot, that there's a lot of precedent there. And so that seems like something that would be done by ordinance. And so you would have a public hearing because, you know, yeah.
But my understanding when we were having this whole discussion about the old school Baptist church, for
Right.
example, is that we have the discretion to just, and you use the word, cone off some spaces for events. And in the same way that we do for parades and so on. So I mean, does it need to be that formal? I mean, obviously, we have to have a good process in terms of informing people and coordinating all that. There's no question about it, but I mean. When we're having those discussions, it was kind of presented as a pretty routine thing, so.
I think that if what you're talking about is putting 2 cones out for 2 hours, that's different than what happened on Broad Street recently, which is, you know, it got coned off for a much larger period of time, which is why I think formalizing what this process is and who approves it, you know, and how it gets approved is important. Because
I think it's important, but I think it's a little bit of an overreaction,
Maybe-
because I think this, you're tying it to what happened on the Hopewell Meeting House. I don't think that this is what this pertains to.
Okay.
If they're having a concert at the meeting house and they have to load in the drums, being married to a drummer.
you throw in a
understand
couple
that, right?
cones and you,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but I think this is mostly gonna be things like for handmade
For handmade
Hopewell.
Hopewell.
And-
Well, it'll be for that too, to be honest with you. I mean,
It would be for all these,
Yeah.
like, I mean, what if
Right.
Nomad wanted to put a truck in front of, you know, on Broad Street
Right,
for an
I think-
event, or, you
Right.
know, listen, I think this is a good thing and we should absolutely do it, but since there's not even a process attached to it,
Yeah, we can talk it through.
I think that what needs to be talked through with the
Is
process.
this gonna also apply to EDC when they do cruise night?
Yeah,
Because technically,
no, I think, it's again,
I mean,
This is-
so I'm just asking, and if it's not.
It should.
No parking, it's not parking, right?
it should. I will say that I remember with working with the police, this is another thing that we wanna be mindful of. Is if you have it official no parking and the police need to put up signs, then the police often do it several days ahead of time. And it doesn't matter if the sign puts a time restriction on it. People see that no parking sign and they just keep driving. So there's just things we need to be mindful of. That's why for cruise night, we stopped asking the police to hang signs. It is, we're telling a room full of people here, but you can't actually ticket somebody for parking in the wrong spot at cruise night. Because we made signs
the
that
signs
said,
don't comply with.
the signs don't comply with restrictions, we're not looking to ticket people.
And people
but the-
they're antique cars.
Right, and because we do it that way, our volunteers can put those signs up at the last minute, whereas if the police were putting them up, they would go 2 days ahead of time. And that really, so there are like unintended consequences and just things we, you know, wanna be mindful
So
of.
everything is a balance,
Yeah.
and you know, the point of this discussion and raising what the concerns that were brought to us
Yeah.
quickly was to have a discussion, so.
Yeah,
Everyone think about it, you know, get your comments back to Doug. You know, the realization is that there's just really no process. Sometimes some people go to the police, some people go to Public Works, sometimes they go directly to town, like when, you know, there's steel delivery for the inn occurred, and none of those were really the wrong way to do it, there's just no one way. And, you know, we even had last year with the, or 2 handmade hopefuls ago, you know, there was
Yeah.
confusion about who to contact.
Right.
And to get the message out that if you're going to do something more than just, you know, parking, you know, say the equivalent of double parking to load a van or something like that, that, you know, there's
Yes.
probably a process that we should go through.
Okay.
And hopefully we have it
Yeah, and
prominently
is-
on our website so people can find it.
And so is there a process document that maybe just didn't get attached or? just-
No, this is
Oh,
it.
This is it, okay, okay.
This is the kickoff.
This was the kickoff, so
Yeah.
by next meeting, we'll have a process
Yeah,
document.
no, that's good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's.
No, I mean, the process, as you've done the form, is that you
Right.
would send it to the administrator, who would decide, you know, instruct you as to who you think you need to contact, or, you know, based on the length. of it,
Right,
gives some
the
discretion.
process document will have like details on what constitutes necessary closures and or who reviews it or something. And it can't just be, and it can't just be, hey, I just decided I want
Or at the very least, how far in advance you need to send.
Yeah,
it.
how far in advance, like how it's reviewed, what,
Well,
yeah.
that's, yeah,
Yeah.
send stuff, so-
Send them away.
All right.
All right. With that, we are going to open the meeting to the public. Couple of things here as we start. We've got people online and in person, so we'll start with people in person. We're gonna try, it was, you know, I don't know, success was not the right word, but we'll try to limit at least our first session to 5 minutes per person as we go through this. I'll also ask, we've got a lot of different topics that people might want to talk about. If we could start with the bucket of everything in the world, and if there's discussions about or questions and comments about anything that is the subject of a first reading of an ordinance, you can certainly make them during public comment, but in each case of the 3 ordinances we're introducing tonight, there will be a public hearing at the next meeting. And while certainly free to receive comments and questions at any time, the formal record really of what council is supposed to consider and what makes up the record of why the ordinance happens should be during that public hearing time. And then in addition to that, those of you who be coming to these meetings, when we get to the topic of Hopewell 57, which I believe that is ordinance 891. I have a professional conflict and won't continue not to participate. So if we could bundle the comments or questions about that, you know, to the second wave of comments and questions, I mean the second period, but we'll first I'll ask for comments and questions on you know, everything else, and then I'll hand over the gavel to Councilman Mackey to run that part of the question and comment session.
Question. I have no idea how to deal with the ongoing.
I got it.
Not, we got you.
So, you know how to do it? Oh, good. 'Cause I'm like an old guy.
Yes. Yes. So that, for those in-person folks who would like to come to the front and make a general or any non-redevelopment question or comment, that would be the time.
Ruth Morpeth Gallery, 43 West Broad Street. So this parking thing, temporary parking closure is a little more complicated than I think most of you can appreciate. A couple of Saturdays ago, the meeting house blocked off parking, and I had an opening on the same night, the same afternoon. So I've had art openings at my location since the year 2000, and I'm right across the street from the meeting house. And these events typically bring 50 to 100 people into town. And they in turn shop and dine at other Hopewell establishments. And never once did I consider in all these years that I should have reserved parking for my audience. You know, I am not so special as to deny other establishments and residents parking. You know, I love the historic nature of this town. I'm sincerely grateful this building is being restored and utilized. I've walked clients over to the graveyard. I know some of those graves, the artfulness of them. You know, it's a shame that there's now a contentious relationship with the merchants in the meeting house. And this kind of entitled behavior of like, I'm gonna put out parking cones so the church can be seen when we have an event. And by the way, the drummer didn't even park between those areas. He parked outside of the things to unload his drum kit. And they put up the cones like 3 hours before the event even started. So it denied parking for all of Broad Street for 3 hours before the event even started. So now we both have an event November 9th. So, you know, if you grant one entity special treatment, it's always at the detriment of somebody else. So it is, I think it's much more complicated than just going, oh yeah, you're having an event. Go ahead and have reserved parking. That's all.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Come on up.
Hi, Melissa Cookman. I had a question about, you guys were discussing outdoor dining, and my understanding is that the governor has ended that, is that true? And to the best of my knowledge, there's only one property that would be impacted by this, because everybody else is already like grandfathered in somehow, and I'm talking about the Chubby's location. I don't know what council decided, discussed, but I just can't imagine asking them to pay, especially since they went through and had to pay thousands of dollars of legal fees for reasons you know. And I would hate to see them be asked for more, especially because of what they do for our community, and to say, well, now you can't, they have to be parking spaces. You don't have to have a parking space for a restaurant. So anyway, so I hope that, those are my thoughts, and that was one thing. And the other thing is, I understand, Ryan, that you have to recuse yourself and the lawyer, but I find it really hard because we chose you to lead us and don't get to know what you think and your opinions are and where you fall in all of this. And it's like, but you're our leader, you know, do you know what I mean? You're the mayor,
I know
so.
very much what you mean.
And I doubt there's a solution to it, but
The solution would be for me to quit my job, to be perfectly honest.
done. There's always a new one, but it's really hard to not know what you're thinking, and is it discussed in executive session? Do you?
No.
You can't be there for anything.
Hold on.
Yeah.
So there are many situations that can cause someone up here or on a planning board to not be able to participate in that.
Right.
They all relate to personal interests of that person. In the past, some of the things we've come up on, even when we started redevelopment, former council president Morehouse, his property was very close to this, within 200 feet. He could not participate because it was determined to be, that's just kind of per se, too close to home. In my case, while I have nothing actually to do with the application, someone who works for the same employer as me, even though I don't participate in it, make no money from it, have nothing to do with the application. I think the idea ethically behind the rule is that, you know, I would somehow curry favor with my employer, I guess, by being lenient. I'm not really sure.
Right. Yeah,
Ultimately, though, there is no zero direct connection other than the applicant has a long-standing relationship with someone
right.
who works at my company. And
And
I don't
also
have an
the
ownership.
attorney also had to step out.
I'll let our attorney explain that, because that one I don't quite understand. We have special redevelopment counsel for the case.
Right,
I'm gonna say it, I can't answer because it's
yes,
a stretch, and I'm gonna say that I don't want to get the explanation wrong. But for my, and I'll let Lisa perhaps explain, but
I'll try.
for my, there's just a per se rule that even though if there were two businesses and there was an attorney or someone involved in one side, people can waive that conflict and I can be walled off like I am and not participate in either side. But governments aren't allowed to do that for
and
good
I
reason.
just, I mean, this is, suppose there were 3 people that had to be recused, we would never have a quorum, like, there.
When you're in a small town, we're lucky that we don't have it more often, to be honest with you.
That's true.
There are blocks of our town where lots of people, we had an interesting project on East, or on West Prospect, for example. A good part of our planning board and council would be,
Oh, right.
challenged not to do it.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for the rest of the council. It is extremely frustrating for me because I do have thoughts on it and it would be
Could you go to
entirely,
a dream state and share it while we're not?
it would be inappropriate, well, positive or negative
Right,
for me to.
okay,
to
I
do
just
that.
wanted to put it out there, because it's.
No,
and
I will
it-
accept it in the spirit of wanting my counsel, and
Yeah.
it frustrates me to no end, particularly on a subject matter where I do this. This is my job to do this type of work, and to not only not be able to participate here, but also not be able to
Yeah,
work on it in my day job, and I'll, by the good graces of my overseers, that, you know, it's not, I still do work there, but ultimately, that is, you know, not helping them or me, that's that situation, I can't, you know, do work on it, and I can't be a part of it here.
okay,
And just I'll add something to this, because behind the scenes, when we realized that Ryan, well, he's gonna be elected, he was running for mayor, we realized that this was an issue, and he's being modest, but he has, of all of us that are elected here, and even most of the people on the planning board, has greater land use experience and understanding of all that, and all of the complexity of that, so we're deprived.
one of the
of
reasons
all
we
of
wanted
that.
him to be mayor, right?
But we're deprived of all that, plus, you know, people naturally, they're like, well, I wanna talk to the mayor, I mean, he's the hub, right? So to have what is arguably one of the most consequential things ever facing the borough be something where he can't be involved. Internally, we had discussions with council, like, is there any possible way that this can be worked out so that he can be available, and it just wouldn't be
Okay.
prudent to do it, and it was, there was no, but believe me, all options were examined to make sure that there wasn't some avenue in it, because it affects everybody, you and, you know.
Thank you.
It's terrible, yeah.
Oh, thank you, yeah, thank you. So yes, on the restaurant issue, you know, it is important that we do treat it uniformly. You may be somewhat close to correct. There's not, you know, many of the other restaurants that you didn't mention either receive site plan approval or are not interested in keeping their temporary things permanent. But what we've been discussing, and what we just discussed in to get legal advice from is what we'll call I want to be careful saying administrative program, but a streamlined way for our restaurants to get these applications in, approved, and permanent in a way that's not going to get them or us sued. So a way that's going to be a planning board application that hopefully won't be as rigorous as a normal planning board application. Our plan will be in the next coming weeks to have a letter coming out to the participating restaurants from the town saying, here's what the process will be. Here's what we're able to do for you in the near term, you know, i.e. what of your improvements can stay and not to panic about, you know, taking up bricks or things like that. And then inviting the affected restaurants to what we'll call something like a pre-application meeting where they can meet with our professionals and talk through what needs to happen. Hopefully mostly on our.
And the cost of doing that with permitting and stuff like that is isn't it a lot of money? Is it a lot of money? I'm just saying, I just would hate to see restaurants, Chubby's and whatever.
We don't want anybody to spend money that they don't have to do, so.
And so are the costs, can they be controlled by, I mean, it's like, you know, if this is $10,000 to do, can council say, all right, but we're gonna waive that and just meet the standards? Is that a possibility? I'm not saying one you've considered, I'm just saying legal.
So,
Yeah.
I'll be careful because some of this touches on legal advice that we just received. Our goal is to do as close to that as possible, to not have any unnecessary money spent, to recognize that the types of applications we'd expect to see are applications of things that seem to work fairly well for the past couple of years and, you know, perhaps do not require, are more appropriate for a waiver process. And that's the type of guidance that we're gonna be giving them through our professionals in the coming weeks. We want to be very, well, the goal is to be very clear about, you know, the timing, what to do, and then how to, you know, essentially meet with our people to talk through the specifics of ABC, do this, you know, if there's if the normal checklist says you need a traffic study for them to talk through, like, do you really need that? Okay, they can support not based on the situation. So, and to have a I guess we'll call it a pre-application meeting with our professionals, so they can go through, do you really need this? No, okay, but as long as you have X, we're good, we'll support that. Let that conversation happen in a streamlined process and use our administrative leniency to make sure that no one has to do anything unnecessarily quickly or unfairly in terms of changing course of what they've been doing. Do we have anyone before we get to,
I have a question it's related to 891, but I won't, it's very general.
if you give your name first?
It's Andrew Osborne, I live on Lafayette. Just as a procedural matter. With rezoning and the change proposed by 891, why is that the process that we're going through? Why are we establishing certain rights for a developer instead of considering a variance? Like if I wanted a 3-car garage, you wouldn't change the zoning law.
So this is is this a general question, Lisa, is that fair? All right, so from a general perspective, the redevelopment plan acts very much like zoning. However, there are certain, both either in the plan, it can spell out what type of relief could be received from the planning board. I believe under, I'm not even having looked at this one, but even if it said it, there's some case law that says that certain types of variances the planning board can't grant. Height being one of them. Those are called D variances, so floor area, height, a couple other variances, use variances, the planning board would not be permitted to grant. So in a normal situation with zoning, you're in the business zone, someone would do what the business zone says in terms of height or density. And if they want to do something else, they could either ask for either a redevelopment plan or rezoning, or come to the planning board to seek relief, and that in the form of a D variance. When the zoning is a redevelopment plan, the D variance trip to the planning board is not an option. Just legally, there's a Trenton case that set that out. So that's at least my understanding from my daily practice that.
And then, I guess with regard to that, there should still be, in order to affect that change in the zoning, there should be ideally a well-established record for the reason for the change. Is that correct, or?
I don't, I'm not sure how to comment on that, yes.
Well, there is a redevelopment plan that was put in place for that location from 2016. So that really sets the stage under the redevelopment law to enable a developer to come in and then create the redevelopment plan. But the designation of a redevelopment area essentially allows the municipality to pave the way to grant exemptions essentially from the zoning for the redeveloper, to enable the redeveloper to develop that property. So that's the course that was chosen in 2016 when that area was designated as a redevelopment area.
Lisa, maybe you could just generally, before we turn it over to questions specifically on Local 57, but with apologies to everyone, because this is going to be a public hearing next month, and there was a special meeting earlier, last month, September. We don't always have all of the particular experts on each topic here at each meeting, and some of these questions might be best for the redevelopment attorney or planner to answer. But Lisa, if you're comfortable, maybe just like the 2-minute version of, I'm gonna say what the process to amending a plan would be, what would be at the hearing, what the planning board's role.
Amending
amending the redevelopment plan or a redevelopment ordinance, for example, what that process.
just in general, well, for purposes of, I guess, tonight, if there were an ordinance on the agenda for amending the redevelopment plan, it's A regular, as an ordinance, a regular ordinance introduced, if it's introduced tonight would be the first meeting, and then it has to be referred to the planning board for compliance, a compliance review, and then following the meeting with the planning board, it would have to come back to the council for a public hearing. Is that what you were looking for, or is that not?
I think so. I mean, so there'll be a public hearing at the planning board after it's introduced by council for first reading, it goes to planning board, for
Yes.
public hearing on a master plan consistency.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
then back here for this body to do a public hearing and second reading.
Absolutely. So there'll be two opportunities, one before the planning board, and that will be noticed, and the public hearing before the council.
Okay, so is there any special, like any other ordinance, is there any, well, I mean, in this case, I think council had a special meeting just to talk about it. Is there any other legal requirements for, I don't know, like proofs that need to be put on or some kind of standard to change something, or is it legislative?
It's legislative. It's essentially legislative, but it has to make sense. There has to be a reason, all municipal action is, there is discretion, but it has to be exercised fairly. And it has to be reasonable, it can't be arbitrary or capricious, so. But the redevelopment law is a different animal to normal zoning. But that policy decision was made for this council, maybe you were the only one, in 2016, right, I guess. So, but it was a decision that was made, and it was,
But like for either a rezoning or a change of redevelopment plan, it's not like going to the planning board and approving a use variance or a bulk variance. There's no specific standard or things that the town or an applicant would show. It's a
for
legislative.
redevelopment, no, it's.
I don't know if that's.
It's very
question you were-
flexible. Yeah, it's a very flexible standard because the idea that it's an area that needs special treatment or else it's not going to get redeveloped. And that's the idea that you're giving, you're providing the ability to the redeveloper to come up with a unique plan and enable a use that may not be what is in the underlying zone. That it's essentially an exception, and that's the idea is to develop a property that might be otherwise undevelopable without that tool. And that's one of the goals of redevelopment, is to enable that's to happen on different types of properties. That's very general.
I don't know if that answers your question.
I don't know if it does either, but
Yeah, I mean, my main concern is, once the change is made, if there is a change to allow every dwelling to have a 3-car garage, it becomes a right of the property owner, does it not? But in other words, once the change is made, there's really no stopping. There's no way to stop it in the future. So it seems if there is significant hesitation, concern from the public, I think there becomes more of an obligation for the council to put a burden on the developer to establish the need for the change and to demonstrate that to the citizens who may be against it, why that change was made, rather than just to say it's not arbitrary and capricious.
Should we put this off until the 57?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're getting a little closer.
I think we should wait till the Hopewell 57 comments, because it's putting Ryan and Lisa.
Yeah, we're dancing a little close to things I probably should not.
A second opportunity for everybody to compare to Hopewell 57, so let's stick to. I
But these are,
appreciate your comments,
but these are questions, that we can get redevelopment council to answer as well. I can.
Yeah, I just wanna I mean, maybe this will help remember, because I used to sit on that side and I think I was up here for a couple months before I fully understood the difference between first reading and the hearing. And I feel like there's so many questions and we want to give them the time and the attention that they need. This month, we're doing a first reading, which means we're just putting the ordinance out there so everybody can read it, and then we can all take the next 30 days to dig into it. And that next month's meeting, which will be presided over by somebody else, because as Ryan spoke, that's where we can really dig deep and we can have our professional counsels here. And it's not that we're not hearing you. It's not that we don't want to talk about it. It's just, it's a procedural, and also submitting comments in advance. We have a whole month to think about this before the public hearing and to learn more, so.
The
yeah.
final vote will be at next
The-
week's hearing, though.
Yeah, so there is the planning, it goes before the planning board,
Right, so you vote tonight.
which is, the next planning board meeting is.
No, it's not.
Okay, yeah, but basically, this meeting is not, there will be a future there will be a future council meeting where there is public discussion, and that is when the vote on it happens. The
That's
vote
the public
tonight
hearing.
is just voting on the fact that we're putting it forward for a hearing. Yeah,
And as a point of order, if anyone were to look at the planning, but the next planning board meeting is Wednesday. And I think it's a good one for everyone to come to, because we're gonna talk about our master plan reexamination. But if you looked at the agenda, this particular item is not on it. It's gonna be, I believe, the November planning board meeting where the planning board will review
this,
the whole
this-
57.
okay.
So that might mean theoretically that this, right, so this could be on an
Hearing could be
agenda until
after that.
after,
It would
right,
be
so it
the
might
day
be
before
December.
Our November
Right.
council meeting. Right.
Is it the day?
Planning
before?
board's the first Wednesday of the month council
Okay.
meeting, unless there's
So,
something
gotcha.
different about the schedule, so.
Okay, that's what I, yeah,
Not so
so,
far.
Right. So, and the planning board part, so it's strange sounding language, but we can all sing it together. The planning board makes a very straightforward determination as to whether the proposed change to the ordinance is not inconsistent with the master plan. I know it sounds arcane, but that's a very narrow thing that they do, but that will be taken up by the planning board. There'll be opportunities for public discussion on that aspect of it. Then the actual public hearing related to the amendment to this ordinance would take place at our next council meeting in November, right? So that, but it's important to understand that the first reading, the introduction, we don't have a public hearing tonight. And so there's intentionally a 30-day period before mandatory, right? Before that can be, or is it 30 days or
I
what?
don't think it's 30 days, it's, I think it's at least 20 days.
Whatever.
It has to be some period of time, but it has to be 2 meetings, yeah.
But anyway, it's basically a month.
Yeah.
Before the public hearing, so that, people have a chance to see it. Then the public hearing it's a formal process that has to happen, but that's not happening tonight. So, Susan, the floor is not open, so, well, I guess it is, but.
It is open. It is open.
You're gonna be talking about 57. we're-
No, I'm not talking about this, I'm trying to understand the process, because we all wanna get it really right.
Got it.
Okay,
So-
so.
So we know who you are, but if you could give it the name.
Susan Flora,
Thank you.
resident, okay, first reading tonight. Then it goes to the planning board,
Correct,
then it comes back
yes.
to another meeting where there's public comment.
Right.
But at that public comment, the council votes on something, right? Are you voting to pass it and make it formal, or is there yet another? Like, does the public hearing and your vote to approve or deny it happen at the same meeting? That's the question.
Three possible outcomes.
Yeah.
Okay, one is the council votes to approve it
Yeah,
as it is. One is the council votes not to approve it. The other is the council determines if they make what's called a substantive change to the ordinance. In other words, they say, well, then that resets the clock, because if it's a substantive change, they have to reintroduce and go through that process again and have another public hearing.
Yeah.
And I leave it to attorneys to decide what's a substantive change. But if I got it right, Lisa, on that?
so, but, so in essence, there is the possibility that public hearing, like we just share with you what we think,
Mhm.
and you all voting to approve it could possibly happen the very same evening.
It could.
The very same meeting. So there isn't ever an opportunity. There could be the potential that there is not the opportunity where you take all this public comment and you think about it more, like. I didn't understand. It's excellent, and I really appreciate you clarifying this. I thought there was public comment and then there was another 30 days until it was to that you would be able to approve it or not, but it
So it's
sounds
a
like.
heightened point, you could bring comments to us within.
I
Yes.
appreciate that.
Fine time.
Yeah, I really appreciate, I'm just trying to understand the process.
And you know, I misspoke, because there's a fourth option, which, you know, the council doesn't have to vote up or down on
We
the
could delay.
ordinance.
We could table it.
The council could table it, so that's the fourth option, sorry, I'm just trying to think of all the possibilities.
Yeah, I
That's
was
another
just,
one.
I didn't realize that there was at least a 25% chance that public comment and an approval could happen all on the same night. I was not aware of that, so I appreciate, I'm trying really hard to learn this, so thank you.
That's exactly what I learned recently, and that's why what I was trying to clarify.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I get what first reading is, but the fact that public comment and an approval can happen all within the same evening is really important to know.
I think also, Susan, that in between public comment and vote, there's discussion.
Yeah.
So I don't want it to come across like we just sit here and wait for it to be done and then we vote however we want anyway, because we
Yeah.
listen, we ask our experts, we talk amongst ourselves. So there's a chance that we vote because we've heard you and we think it's still the right.
Right, but you're talking in public in front of us, like,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
not like any other,
Right.
you know,
No,
so
no.
I am.
We do not-
secret meetings.
There's no
Come
executive
on,
session.
I'm not asking.
No,
I'm not-
Guys, let's one at a time, so we can,
Yeah, I'm really not saying that, and I'm not alluding to that.
I'm not-
What I'm alluding to is that the changes that this council is considering are, it's a big deal. And so for me to understand the process, that you all could hear hours and hours of comment and either approve, deny, table, or amend all that night is new to me. I always thought it had to be at the following meeting, so thank you.
Right. Sure.
I am not ever saying you guys are having weird secret meetings.
And your hats would be great.
all right, so, look,
It's just, it's a follow-up to that, and I could be completely wrong, but from my limited memory, bad memory,
mhm.
sometimes the ordinance is voted on before there's an open public session.
No,
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 never.
no,
Okay.
so mechanically, the point of tonight is to provide notice, essentially, and enough time for people to get their thoughts, so that at a meeting, there could be input, and then it seems kind of, you know, silly at times, but I think the idea behind it, why the state has us do it this way, is so people can know in advance what's gonna be discussed, watch the discussion, everyone can see what everyone else from the public has said at one spot, and then give the council the options to proceed, to take more time, to change it, or yeah, you're.
Like I said.
And we do, if people have comments in between, they can be submitted to the administrator to share with us. You know, because that's part of what that 30-day period is, and. I think use it, or 20 days, whatever.
So I don't see any more people in person on general topics. Let's move to our online viewers, of which there are a good, looks like we got 14 tonight. If anyone would like to make a general comment or question not on redevelopment, now would be the time to raise your virtual hand. Seeing none, we'll just as I transition out, I will not participate in this, but I made some promises technically to some of my colleagues here that I'd help them through the online part of this, so we'll do any online comments for those who'd like to speak about redevelopment. Now would be the time to raise your hand, push the raise hand button. Actually, don't see any, so perhaps now would be the time for
Is that everybody?
that's everybody. What I'll do is, again, I'll try to do this every month. I know it's both complicated and it's quite irritating for me as well to have to be reminded that I can't participate. That's why I came here to do this kind of stuff, and it's frustrating for me, but I do both because it's complicated and not everyone's here at every meeting. I'll continue as I hand the gavel over to one of my colleagues to remind everyone the reason why I can't participate. So I'll do that again because of the professional conflict I have, I will step aside, and, hand things over to Councilman Mackey as our senior, councilperson here, and I will step outside.
Off to your code of silence.
You thought my water bottles.
Okay,
I'm going to.
oh, Lisa. So. The floor is still open. Do we have? That's questions.
All right,
Hi, how are you?
I'm James Higgins.
Yeah.
I'm sure you were aware that there was a meeting last night by the town. A committee to discuss the concerns with the redevelopment of 57 Hamilton. Couple things that came out of that meeting I think is really important to say. Nobody in this community spoke up against bringing new families into this community or against affordable housing. And there's a consensus that we do want something developed there. The concern is what's being developed there. It was an open conversation. It was a fruitful conversation. And it was a compassionate conversation of the community. There's a lot that came out of that conversation, and I'm going to forward the remarks to all of you through the process. And we'd really appreciate the time to take those into consideration and respond to them appropriately. The concerns are genuine. They are documented. They were researched. And more importantly, this is what the community's asked. And I know in some capacity, you feel like you may have answered them and they're asking the same questions. But unfortunately, the answers that we've been receiving aren't adequate. We want something done. We care about this community and we know that you guys live here as well and you do as well. But there is a community that's sat, regardless of the number that may be discussed. It was very well attended for a meeting that was put together haphazardly in 5 days. And I can assure you that the meeting could be much larger if I had more time to prepare for it. So I'd ask you to consider this. I ask tonight the council to pass a motion to table the introduction of the ordinance 891 until the council and the community have more information on the impact of the development of the schools, the environment, and the traffic safety, and do due diligence on the developer. Thank you.
Roger Thorpe, I live on Railroad Place. I was just wondering if you've done any kind of an analysis on what kind of revenues you expect to get from this development.
Residues, revenues, I'm sorry, hearing these those here, but. We haven't, to my knowledge, we haven't done that analysis yet. It's an important part of all of this. I can tell you that right now, I believe our tax revenues from the property under the current state, it's about $60,000 a year, which is not much for what's arguably one of the most valuable properties in town. Let me just put that in the context of, that's probably 5 single-family homes in the borough, and about that ballpark. That's part of the fiscal analysis that would come with this process. It's a very important factor, but we haven't done that analysis yet.
Is that what he was asking?
You asked if we had.
I was asking
what the
if you
revenues
had,
would be.
yes, if you had considered and done an analysis to get an idea of how much revenue the town would get from doing this project.
Okay,
Because if one had the idea that there might be competitive ways of generating income that were quite different than this, it would be nice to be able to balance one versus the other. So having an idea, do you think you're gonna get 100,000 a year, 1 million a year, 10 million a year? I like to think in orders of magnitude.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, and I don't want to, just guess. In my own limited understanding, I would expect it might be an order of magnitude difference relative to what we're currently getting, but that's based on just me guessing with no experience in that. That's something that we put in the hands of our professionals to figure out. And it's my understanding that there is a fiscal analysis that's part of all of this. where that'll be done. We just haven't done it yet. But it's very important.
That's what I was gonna
No,
say.
no,
I think it's important.
It's very important, because we're looking at, and I'll just add to this, I mean, we're looking at, we have a small town, as you know, with limited resources, and it gets harder and harder every day for us to just be a little Hopewell Borough, just fiscally to make it all work with all the capital projects that we have, road projects, and honestly, with a lot of unfunded regulatory mandates that come from Trenton mostly that just don't take into account the limited resources that a small town has. I mean, we have 2 full-time and 1 half-time administrative staff for the whole town, for example. So, each year we're taking on additional challenges. It's kind of incremental, but looking at the future and, looking at our future, wanting to remain as Hopewell Borough, as a small town in an era when I think there are a lot of people that politically don't necessarily value small towns. The larger picture, it's very important. Yes, that's all.
Well, the reason for the question really is that it has been proposed that if the 4 acres were covered in solar panels, you could generate enough electricity to sell back to PSE&G that you could probably reap in the several $100,000 a year range. We haven't gotten hard numbers on that yet, but that's just something that would put no demands on the water system, no demands on the sewer system, no demands on the school, no traffic problems. Don't have to worry about permeability. You don't have to worry about even the toxic condition of the land or flooding for that matter. But would it make sense to even consider something like that if it was an order of magnitude lower than what you could get? But if it's in the same ballpark, you might want to think about a different plan for generating revenue.
Interesting concept. One thing I'll just point out, because, and this isn't necessarily relevant to your question, but I want to make sure people know, there seems to be some confusion among some in the community about who owns the property. So the borough does not own this property,
We know that.
Yeah.
Matter of fact,
I know, but I've heard other people have suggested that we did, so I just want to clarify that, just to make sure everybody knows. So, there have been other suggestions about making it into a park, for example, and this is one I haven't heard. It's interesting. I haven't looked at that. I haven't looked at the math. But remember that you would have to buy the property. You'd still have to demolish the building to do all that, to put anything on there. So
There's
you're
costs
looking
on
at,
both sides.
and the permitting and environmental costs are gonna be probably the same as putting any other redevelopment on there as well, because the moment you so much as look at a stream corridor, it triggers a whole lot of complicated rules. So just bear that in mind, that, it would be one thing if you were talking about a green field where you're not suggesting that we do this, where you could just literally build solar panels on it tomorrow. All the complexities of this site that make it difficult to redevelop would still apply to that. But the question about the economics is an interesting one. And I know just the person to talk to about that. Former councilman was all about solar, but anyway, thank you. I appreciate it. It's a thoughtful question.
And can you just clarify
Yeah.
this by the fiscal analysis? It's not that we haven't wanted to do it. It's that it is, that it's built in.
Going to be it's built into the process. We just haven't done it at this time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Come on up, Beth.
Yeah. Well, Beth.
Beth Young, I live on Elm Street. And,
Come up so we can hear you, Beth. please.
sure, I guess my feeling, in listening, we have such a community. I hear resources, we are a small town, we have very few resources, but our community is full of resources. Last night at that meeting, we had somebody from DEP, we had somebody who's on the school board, we had, people here who are help, that can be of help. And I think in any way that the council can coordinate that somehow and use the community resources that we have to make this process a little easier would be great. I mean, you've got professional people here all over the place. And instead of feeling as though you have to do it all yourself, it would be nice if you included the people who in the community as much as possible. I know you can't do that 100%, but yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, I just have a quick follow-up on the procedure again. When you're rezoning as a site of redevelopment, if I understand correctly, the developer can basically, since it's a different process, can hypothetically ask for anything. And then the procedure would be the council takes up all these requests and then
Acts on.
weighs it and decide. Does only the developer have standing to ask for this? In other words, you know, someone who is not an interested party, does not own the property, is not employed by the owner to develop the property, could they say, I'm interested in redeveloping this as a mixed use, commercial residential. Would the council then be required to consider that as well?
Well, so thinking about the redevelopment process, and what a redevelopment plan is, I mean, I think the answer is yes, but it's a question of when and how. So, so just to back up and think about what a redevelopment plan is, right? So as you said, it's essentially like a rezoning the process. It's a framework, right? And following the designation as quote an area in need of development. My understanding, I'm not a planner, but the way it's always been explained to me is redevelopment plans can range from being very general or very prescriptive, and there's a whole sort of spectrum of things. Some towns will look at a property and put together a redevelopment plan that allows for, you know, multiple different uses. I mean, particularly in a downtown where they say, well, you know, we might want mixed commercial retail, we might want this, we might want that. So they create this thing as a framework in the hope that it will bring in proposals that are valuable to the town.
Right.
And in contrast to, for example, if you have zoning that doesn't really allow those things that you want, you could change the zoning, but the zoning may be more prescriptive. But the other thing is, to do that, there's a bit of a chicken and egg process, because a town could dream up all sorts of things that they would love to have, but there might be nobody out there who wants to do it. So then you've created a redevelopment plan that sounds terrific and it's a great dream, but it doesn't really yield anything. On the other hand, you know, you could work with information that comes from the development community where they say, well, here are the things that we'd be interested in doing, and here are the possibilities. Then you have to look at that and try to come up with a framework that you think would work, assuming that that's something that you want. I would think, and again, not an expert on this, if you had a redevelopment plan that allows for a particular type of redevelopment, and another party came in and said, well, I have another option that's of interest, you could amend the redevelopment plan to allow something else if the council decided that that's what they wanted to have. I mean, the redevelopment plan can be amended at various times. However, there is a point, and we're not at that point yet, but there is a point under the local redevelopment law where after you've crafted a redevelopment plan and adopted it, that you then designate a redeveloper for the site. And I think that's an exclusive designation. I'm not sure. So now it's unfortunate because this is a question we should probably bring up again at the public hearing and involve our professionals here, because I want to be really careful that I'm not misspeaking. This is just my understanding of it. But so if you had a designated redeveloper and they were going to do one thing and another redeveloper came along and said, well, I have a different idea, I'm not sure how that would work functionally.
Well, yeah, what I was more thinking about is, you had mentioned at the last special meeting that part of the reason for the density change was because of the high cost of remediating the property and allowing for build a profit. Yeah, I mean, from what I understand, and I'm not an expert on it, that state brownfields law allows, there's a fund available for mixed use rezoning, like purely residential, I don't think you can get brownfields money. But if it were gonna be commercial residential, then you could get, I think you could get up to 55 million, I'm sure we wouldn't qualify, but. You know, a big significant portion of that cost could be mitigated by state funds. If the rezoning wasn't so narrowly tailored to one interested party's request. In other words, if we had said mixed use and residential, that might pique the interest of some other developers.
Well, it might. So a couple of things. So I believe the fund you're talking about is essentially out there for example, the municipalities that have brownfield sites that they own. Or that are abandoned or otherwise they're having trouble remediating and they require environmental remediation. And the idea with that is that the state actually helps you with funding the remediation as a way of kickstarting this and redeveloping the site. In this particular case, the redeveloper is not responsible for doing the environmental remediation. Rockwell Automation is the responsible party. So, and they have been working on this site and on peripheral sites, other offsite since I believe it was at least 2019 when they set with the administrative consent order. So, and they're doing all the things they're supposed to do. But the way this works in terms of the environmental remediation part is they're responsible as the responsible party for soil remediation, groundwater remediation, anything affecting sediments in the stream, and anything affecting vapor intrusion, right, in the overlying properties. So that's their responsibility. But the way the state environmental rules are crafted, they're not responsible for the building structure itself, other than to install a vapor mitigation system, which they did. So in this case, in the cases I've been involved in, as a consultant, as an OSRP, usually it's the redeveloper that's on the hook for doing the building demolition and all the site work. If it's specifically related to contaminated materials, then the responsible party, in this case, Rockwell, it's their responsibility. But in this case, so the burdens, I guess, that fall on the developer related to the site, as compared with, say, a greenfield site that wasn't at this location, are the cost of demolishing and removing the building and everything that goes with that. There are some time elements to this too, because what happens is, if this happens, they would demolish the building. Rockwell would then do any solar remediation they would do underneath the building, and it's really just limited to areas that are covered by buildings right now. And we don't even know actually how much they would have to do. And then, and I think the applicant said that the estimate is about 8 months to do that. So then, you know, the developer's paying for the financing costs for the 8 months while they wait for Rockwell to do their thing. Then they get out of the way, and at that point, all the soil is remediated. And then the developer can do what they're going to do. But they also have all the environmental permitting requirements related to stormwater, wetlands, the DNR canal review areas, another set of surface water related rules, and all of that actually pertain to building a site, you know, adjacent to a stream. So all of those things are on the burden of the redeveloper, whoever they are. But the actual remediation under the NJDEP site remediation program is Rockwell's. So, yeah, is that, can I answer your question or partly? I mean, I guess it's
I think mostly it.
okay.
I guess, I mean,
Yeah.
I'll just ask one last kind of related question.
Yeah.
It's hard to formulate questions because there's no developer's application on file available to look at.
Right.
So we're not, I kind of feel, you know, uninformed and playing catch up at all these meetings since we're not privy to what the developer is asking for and what they're proposing. That's not available on our website.
So what the developer, you know, what we are addressing under this ordinance is essentially the framework, the rezoning. At this point, we don't have a site plan application for the developer. The developer is not going to submit a site plan application until the redevelopment plan, well, we have a redevelopment plan, but at this point, we're talking about amending it, so presumably the developer's waiting to find out what the outcome of that would be. So from the developer's standpoint, you know, there it makes perfect sense, you're not gonna start committing serious money to a site plan application and all the engineering and permitting and architectural costs until you know that you actually have a framework that you can work in. So that is the next process, and that's where the details really come in. And the burden is on the applicant to put forth, you know, traffic studies, they have to analyze the potential impact on the schools, architecture, historic context, everything, all the engineering, all the flood related stuff. I mean, they're required to do all that permitting with the state of New Jersey, but that's sort of incorporated by reference into our rules. So all the actual details and the presentations and the representations by their professionals happen under the site plan application process.
But that'll all happen after the rezoning has been completed, right?
Right, and it's a kind of a chicken and egg process, because without, in effect, the rezoning, it's hard to get anybody to, I mean, who would commit all those resources to a site plan application if they thought they were submitting an application for something that wasn't generally permitted within that framework? And it's not an ideal situation, I agree. But it is unfortunate. I mean, we've talked to our planner, John Slagle, about this, and it is, so in this case, we have a redevelopment ordinance that establishes the basic parameters, the limitations on what can be done there. But then within that, the developer still has to make their case to the planning board in every single detail of it. I mean, down parking, I mean, every last shrub is literally shown. And then their professionals make their presentation, and our professionals were actually paid for through escrow money that they put up. So they work for us, but their fees are paid. Then evaluate and analyze all of that and make their recommendations to the planning board, and the planning board has questions. But basically, the job of our professionals is to hold their professionals' feet to the fire, if you will, and make sure that their models, their engineering, all the basis for this application is sound and correct. And then, once all of that has been done, then the planning board makes a determination as to whether or not, you know, the site plan application is accepted. And, you know, it's not usually a yes or no question. I mean, even with fairly straightforward site plan applications, there's usually a whole series of conditions. There's a resolution that's issued at the end that says, well, it's approved, but subject to this and this and this. So it's, and I can't imagine the site plan application process for the planning board. I mean, it's got to be several meetings. I mean, the public element of that has got to go through several months because of the complexity of this. So that's a long process. But that's, and I realize it's very frustrating for people, because there are a lot of questions that people would like to have answered today. And it's really, there's really no way for us to answer those questions with that level of specificity until there is a plan and until all that work is done. So anyway, I'm talking too much, but is that helpful? Sherry, you look like you
Yes,
wanted to add something.
no, I think
Okay.
that was great.
David.
Hey,
How you doing?
David Waldman, town resident. Just a broad question. Having been through this over the years,
Yeah,
Have we-
you and me both.
yeah. Have we, what level or degree of due diligence have we performed with our dance partner, so to speak, with the developer? Do we know what his company is? What other projects he's done, what other references we have, and what their cash position is, who their investors might be, what kind of a business partner they might be, so as not to leave us hanging with an abandoned project because they run out of money, just as one example of many potential nightmares.
Right.
Like, what is the framework and the onus of the council to undertake due diligence as to deciding, do we want to work with this person? Are they qualified? Do we have parameters for that? Or what is the process?
And I'm gonna defer on that, unfortunately, because that's a question for our professionals when we have the public hearing. I mean, it's certainly a good question. And I know that's gonna be tied in, because there's a couple of elements of this. One, as I said, there's the designation of the redeveloper, right? Which is, essentially or the alter. The other, there's a redeveloper's agreement, which is an exhaustive contract that has all the terms and conditions between the municipality and the redeveloper. I mean, so for example, if there are things that aren't captured by your ordinances or even by statutes that you think are important, you wrap those things in there so that, the borough has control over it. It's a very important question. I don't know exactly where it happens, but I'm fairly certain it happens as part of that process. But
But I have a conceptual concern, if I can just interrupt for, I have a conceptual concern that I attended the meeting that was referred to yesterday, which was a great meeting, I thought, just to show that, the numbers of people that show up and their interest and their compassion for this town that we all love. But there was extensive research done over the last 4 or 5 days by people who know their way navigating around the web. And there was a conspicuous absence of information on who this person was. They don't have an operating website for their company. We don't have information relating to projects that they've completed successfully. There isn't a portfolio or a CV, if you will, of who they are, what they've done. And normally, in my experience, when you're working with somebody, they're bragging about, well, we did this, we did that. They give you their portfolio of accomplishments as a selling point for, this is what we're doing, this is why we're great. So just a note that I think we, as a preliminary matter last night, noted the conspicuous absence of any substantive information about this particular developer and his company. So I think it's a red flag in my mind.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, we'll
But I
see if
just,
we can address that, because it's, I know there's some developers that have huge websites, with lots of information that you wouldn't want coming anywhere near our town.
yeah.
But, it's a good point. It was funny, I was having a conversation with Sherry about this earlier today, because she mentioned that this concern had been raised. And I remember a million years ago in Princeton, there was a place that was where they erected the steel on this place in Nassau Street. It was sort of near Whole Foods, that end of town. And it was sort of at the stage where the Hopewell Inn is right now, and then suddenly nothing. Because whoever it was went bankrupt, and there was this steel structure, and then 3 years later, somebody bought it and finished the thing, and but obviously, you wanna make sure that, you're at the alternate. That's totally legitimate concern.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. What happened to Model Avenue? That's at a standstill now too?
Pardon?
Model Avenue, the project there, what is it?
Oh, the
going?
lumberyard?
Yeah, is it going or not? Where are we at with that?
Yeah, they're moving out, they're in the process of moving out and they're relocating to.
And the contractor's going ahead with the beautiful plans there?
Whatever, he's approved.
So he has an approved site plan application. It was approved, it was a couple of years ago, and basically, yeah, so once the lumberyard business has actually moved, the last time I spoke to Mr. Whitman, the big hangup for him was all the stormwater permitting that he had to do, all the surface water related stuff. And he'd gotten all that done. I think his last hurdle was the DNR Canal Commission review zone, which is a lengthy process, and I believe that was completed. So as far as I know, he's ready to move forward with it.
I think
So-
I asked for a little extension, didn't they?
Well, he did, because, so that was before planning board, the last planning board meeting, so there's a what happens is you get it wasn't really an extension on the approval, but there's a process, they get a 2-year period where if any of the rules or regulations or your ordinances change, they're exempt from those changes. In other words, there's a grace period that goes with it, and he asked for a continuation on that just because his time had expired. And it was a pretty straightforward thing, so.
But it's still in the.
Yeah.
That don't work.
Yeah.
I just had one quick comment, after listening to David, if, David Woolman, David, when you reach out to our professionals on that question, is that something that they can get back to us in advance of next month's meeting? Cause
Sure.
just as I echo the question, and so I am curious what you know, what the parameters are.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
make the call.
Yeah, thank you.
I was stoked for some more information about that too, like some
Yeah,
previous properties, and Sharon and I were talking about that.
yeah,
too.
and I think it's good to get it before,
Yeah.
right, before, the, you know, a couple weeks in
And
advance of the
it's
meeting.
captured in what James is gonna send us,
Yeah,
right? That's one of the.
Some of it is the idea that.
Well, we're taking notes, but
Oh,
that's.
perfect, yeah, but we'll.
Okay.
Are you, when she's done, you can come out.
Oh, okay.
That's okay. And the other, our resident architect, a few meetings ago, he submitted paperwork to the attorney about the fact that although they consider Hopewell 57 4 acres, it's technically 3, because they're adding the parking lot to the area where the building is. And according to his expertise, the most units that legally, unless they made some sort of little tweaks because of the redevelopment, the most he could put on there is 90 units, not 136. So that kind of like just went under the table or something. We never heard of anything about that again. And when he presented his new presentation, yes, he remodeled and made some tweaks, but he's still up to 130 units. And the other thing is going to be all electric. How the heck is this town gonna put up with the summer we just had, 105-degree days, with brownouts that we have already on a beautiful, cool day? How's this town gonna keep up with the electric? I hope they have a good plan. And also, we do need another fire truck for 4 stories. That is a given.
Okay, I mean, you want me to respond? Because I mean, my understanding is the fire truck is adequate for that height. We've already talked to the fire department about it, they're the experts on it.
Yeah, I can answer that quickly.
Yeah.
It's one of the first
Yeah, right.
questions I asked at the fire commissioners meeting. Before we even brought up the possibility of a 4-story building, and the answer from them, there's multiple answers. One is, no matter what happens, the fire department is part of the design review.
Right.
And they won't let an unsafe building be
Right.
produced. And so their answer was multiple faceted, that all new construction is heavily suppressed by sprinklers.
Sprinklers, right.
But because we are a valley-wide shared service department, we would use Pennington's for story accessible fire truck.
Right.
And the combination of automatic suppression and us using shared services with them to their, you know, before they've even seen the site plan, that to them was an adequate coverage.
And they, again, review all the fire
Yes.
expression system.
So whatever it turns out
That's
to be.
all part of the site plan application process. So, as far as Mr. Buddha's, questions that he had, those were submitted to, the attorney, the attorney that's actually working for the redevelopment. I'm gonna let her respond to those. She can respond to that at the next public hearing, but my understanding is this issue of the site being 4.3 acres combined, the 2 lots together. And under redevelopment, they are treated together as a single
Yeah, I
redevelopment
figured that
area,
much.
and that's how it works. It's, you know, outside of the redevelopment context, apparently the mechanics are different. So I understand why Paul had that question, but
Yeah.
she looked at it and said, you know, and if it had been, we could have modified the ordinance accordingly, but that's, yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah, back to, the Model
Can
Avenue
you
development.
say
Yeah,
your name?
please. Brenda Considine, and I'm on Model Avenue.
Mhm.
In between the time that the plans for Model Avenue redevelopment were approved, and now we've had some rain. And we've had some major flooding, and where I live on Model Avenue is sort of the nexus of all of that. But permeability, I think, is an issue that probably ought to be revisited, given what we now know, and given the records flood maps. That what we approved years ago, what was it, 5, 6, 7 years ago with that site? A lot's changed since then. We know a whole lot more about runoff and rain and flooding. And it, you know, I just think we have to take a look at that again and make sure that the decisions around impermeable surfaces still make sense.
So
Before storm Ida.
Uh-huh. Was that the same with, Hopewell 57? That these things were approved before Ida, because I
Is
need
that a question?
Dave to explain.
Hold on, wait. Let me just respond to the question. The lumberyard application wasn't approved 5 or 6 years ago. It was a little over 2 years ago. But I mean, that was part of what's been done. I know it's very extensive permit analysis on stormwater. I mean, not only for the stormwater rules that were actually revised recently, and it's treated as a major development, which is a very extensive analysis. Also, under the DNR canal zone rules, I know he's subject to that as well. So there's a whole series of different layers. So those rules are up to date, the state rules that he's under. It's not really so much a matter of the borough ordinances. So my understanding of the rules and the regulations, there's not much that would have changed between the time that site plan application was approved and today in terms of what the stormwater related rules are. I mean, again, if you wanted to raise that issue again, when we have the borough engineer here at the public, or actually at our next council meeting, that might be a time to bring that up, but,
I was gonna say, Dave, also, isn't it, it's like one flat piece of land now, right? Whereas when they build, there'll be like runoff.
well, there's a whole
Landscaping
series of
builds and-
stormwater
yeah.
controls for
That will be
both
put-
storage, right, and
Yeah.
also stormwater and surface water quality. I mean, it's a complicated site because you get runoff coming from the railroad tracks and the culvert underneath. But suffice it to say, they're not allowed to do anything on that site or any other site of that scale in town that would increase the flooding hazard to anybody around. And that's the basic rule of the flood hazard rules. So, I haven't seen, and our engineer would be reviewing all of the permitting and engineering work that was done subsequent in terms of their stormwater, but that's. I think the rules are pretty stringent. I don't think there's much that's changed that. And so, what was the,
Oh,
Lori,
on the July 1st meeting, when you did a presentation, and we talked about Ida and Andre.
Yeah.
And you didn't explain, and I live directly across the
Yeah,
street, and I had the flood water in my driveway, so, and my neighbors got blasted in their basement, but. You explained how the water ran, and I
oh,
didn't
so you
kind
wanted me
of,
to just.
if you can kind of go through
Sure,
that again.
Sure, so.
What happened?
So, yeah, just generally speaking, so the water that flows into that stream comes for the most part from north of the railroad tracks. So if you think about where the Ruggieri farm is, and actually that whole sort of hill slope, the cemetery, all that, there's a whole big, what we call a catchment area where a lot of water flows down. And basically, when it gets down to the railroad tracks, I believe there are 3 culverts that go through the railroad tracks that let that water come through. So you can think of the railroad tracks as like this elevated berm, almost like a dam, and the water has to go someplace. So I'm not sure about the total area, what we call the catchment area that captures that water, but I'm looking at a map the other day, it could be close to 100 acres. So that water all comes flowing down and then actually goes through a culvert that's big enough to drive through pretty much underneath the railroad track. You can go over to Somerset Street and see it. And then there's the stream. So that's where the majority of that water comes from. I mean, obviously there's water that comes from the streets and the areas around it, but it's a pretty large area. And then, as you know, that water then flows into an inlet into a big culvert, a big pipe that then carries it through town and it discharges downstream of what we used to call the Castoral property at 60 East Broad. So there's a fairly large area that captures water that then run, and it's true everywhere else in town. If you look at, we have a lot of issues up on Hart Avenue and all that water that flows down, goes into our stormwater system, then it discharges over in Mall Avenue, and then it comes through, it's daylights there, and then it goes underneath, and Ruth knows all about where the water goes after that. So I'll just mention, I'm doing a kind of a walk and talk, a tour of a day or two with Andrew Lloyd, who is a Hopewell Borough resident, and he's part of the Mercer County Planning Board, so that we can scheme about some possible ideas about stormwater controls, as he put it, teeing up ideas for the engineers to actually look at some options and then see what we would have to do to apply for funding and so on, because we've got these larger issues.
What do we do about the underground water? Because that's our main.
Oh, I know, and.
On
and-
Lafayette.
Yeah, and the groundwater situation you have is not something that we can do much about, short of, putting in wells and pumping the water out. I mean, I was just looking at a map of the area where Hopewell 57 is and your street, and they talk about, groundwater recharge. And your area, because it's basically saturated, there isn't any groundwater recharge, because as you know, you're the one who said, I've thought of you, your sump pumps on all the time.
Oh, yes, well, actually, it's interesting because we haven't had much rain, but I would say for the last 3 months or so, I have one side where I have 3 sump pumps, one where that runs on battery and then, power, and then 2 others, and my sump pump there is, they're mud now. And I don't know if it has anything to do with the pumps not running across the street or what, and the lack of rain, but I'm happy that they're dry. But I've been living in that house for 18 years, and, and I know that every house that got built from Hamilton to the end there, we all have, I didn't get flooded, water came up to my curbs in my driveway, all my, and unfortunately, my other neighbors, the water rushed through their basement windows and they really lost their cars too. But, we all got water in our basements a couple inches from sump pump overflow. I don't have flood insurance. I didn't get flood water rushing into my house. So, that's a big concern. And then they're gonna go and do whatever across the street if that comes to tuition. And he talked about rescaping and all this stuff, so I can't imagine there's no groundwater under that building. He said it's filled with mold and everything else, so it's gonna be quite interesting. I don't know how the DEP is gonna get around all that.
Well, my understanding is there will be no basements in any development on that property for exactly the reason you're talking about, because.
Oh, they're gonna get flooded.
Right,
If we have another and it's got, look what happened in North Carolina, and it's happening again with this other storm. I mean, it's inevitable that we are going to get what we got in Ida and Ira again. And every ground floor in that building will be wiped out with water, I guarantee that.
And the FEMA maps have changed since those 2 storms.
I mean, it seems like ridiculous for anybody to want to put any time and effort into it. I mean, I know it needs to be redeveloped. This gentleman here with his solar panels had a wonderful idea. I mean, I'm sure, and unfortunately, you people weren't on the council. I mean, this started 15 years ago. I was sitting at a meeting about the the housing and all these issues. And Castro should have been redeveloped. There's a building that's empty right by the gas station. That's all, that gray building.
we're
Couldn't
trying,
those be changed to apartments, or the theater changed to apartments?
believe me, we're trying. I mean, we
I
can't
mean, I
force somebody to redevelop. I've been on council for 25 years, and on the planning board for 14, so I was involved in that one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I mean, I believe,
know what
I
I'm
mean,
saying?
it's,
We should have directed our efforts like to these places,
We're
and now there's
both
opportunities.
places, yeah.
Question online, I don't know if
Yeah.
you wanna go back to that, but if
Yep.
people should come up and be timed.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
actually-
yeah.
Come up and say your name, please, because it's not
It's Rick Considine, I'm in Model Avenue. I just have one more question about the ordinance under consideration. Is that available online for us to review now?
It will be tomorrow.
It will be tomorrow, and the only reason and we're making a slight change to the language tonight that I just gave to Reggie. There were a couple of tweaks, but it'll be posted online tomorrow. And then it'll be available for you to review for the next month.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I only wanted to sort of reflect some of what I'm hearing in that I think as residents, we're gonna want as much flexibility in that ordinance before we start moving to development plans. So that there are options for any developers who might want to come in here. So that's what I'll be reading for,
Okay.
is to make sure that there's as much flexibility in that plan as possible, and we're not tailoring it to sort of a particular kind of development. Thanks.
Thank you.
Are you looking at me, Dave?
Oh.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's a question again.
Yeah.
I have a couple of things. When Mr. Albert presents, he says he's not the developer. He uses another phrase.
Contract purchaser.
And so what is a contract, what's the difference
I
between?
believe what it is that he doesn't own the property, but he has a contract to purchase the property.
If
And
this goes through? I
Right.
guess, okay,
That's right.
all right.
Yeah.
He says that he has spent, like $150,000, I think that was his number, I don't remember. And that he's been working on this for 2.5 years. Did the council know that he was working on this for 2.5 years? Have you been, because that's what he said, that for 2.5 years he has been, working on this.
So he actually, I was looking at a survey that he had done of the property, which I think was from 2022, yeah. There were some informal meetings that we had with him. There's a redevelopment subcommittee on planning board. Of which I'm one of the members, there's just 3 people, and then Joanna, our planner, and also the borough engineer. So, and over the years, that people had come in with an interest, we would sit down informally with them and say, well, what are you thinking? And part of that was to offer some initial feedback. So yeah, but it was a long process over a couple of years, maybe we might not meet for months.
I think the community feels that, this is being rushed through, that because we've heard about it, and now it's like gonna maybe happen, so quickly, and to hear that somebody's been working on it for 2.5 years, and there's never been, we didn't know that, so that's a comment. Everyone talks about Hamilton and Lafayette, nobody cares about Somerset Street. Their designs didn't show anything about what it was gonna look like on Somerset Street. When I asked, are the homes or apartments going to be entered from Somerset Street? Or is that gonna be everybody's back door, or just a big solid wall? And they sort of didn't answer it, Mr. Albert, sort of didn't answer it and said, yeah, it'll be both, which doesn't make any sense,
I think
but.
he's gonna come back with plans specific for Somerset. Didn't he answer you that? I hope he
No,
does.
he didn't, he said, yeah, well, he doesn't have to
Yeah, he
say.
did, actually.
Yeah, and we would be just,
Yeah,
yeah. we
he
need- we
did,
need to see
he said he was gonna do a drawing for you. I remember that.
Okay,
And then, again, the details of all that would really be in the site plan.
Right.
application, so.
And I will, as far as the parking issue, well, it's 195 spots. And 10% can be on the street. And no more than 10%, according, if I read that correctly. So that's 19 spots. Are they going to be designated for apartment use only? What's gonna happen to the parking at Tomato Factory? Because that'll be an easy fix for them if they can't find a street spot. Twine, our parking, we've had people park there all the time anyway from that building for years, like all the play people and stuff like that would park there. So that would really impact us if our customers couldn't find a place to park. And I will say this, at every single meeting that I go to, no one should dare say that all these cars, 190, whatever it is, I forget the number of spots, but I think it was cars, is not going to impact traffic. I spoke to a policeman who was working here this last week, and I asked him, and we were talking about it, he said, well, they're gonna have to put a light at Hamilton and Broad, because no one's gonna be able to get through. If I hear one more time, it's about the speed and we're gonna calm it, that just means that there'll be more cars moving slowly. And I think that the fact that we are even considering letting that many cars into this town in one spot is just unacceptable and incredible that it would be considered. It's a one-way, it's a dead-end street one way, and I mean, I'm prepared to sit at the corner and get a counter and count the cars and traffic now. I don't know how you can even consider that kind of density. Forget that I think it's too many apartments or whatever. It's just, that's a ridiculous amount of traffic. To have the developer say, people, don't worry about that. People work from home now. There isn't rush hour. Well, anybody who lives in this town know there is a rush hour in both directions. And don't worry, there won't be any children there. That's just nonsense. Nobody can afford to live anywhere. So if you can get an apartment in Hopewell and go to the elementary school, you're gonna do that. And you might have 2 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment or 3 kids. So the fact that there's gonna be that many people and that many cars, I don't know how the council or anybody could agree with this. That's what I wanted to say. Well, no, say it every week.
Hey, everybody.
Yes.
Nice to see you guys.
Mark, you look stiff.
Thank you. I know. I'm chasing around some kids. Mark Peters, 83 West Prospect. Good to see everybody. Came here a lot later than expected. A couple thoughts, and then a question or two that I don't have the answers to that I'm hoping you guys can maybe help me out with. thought the event yesterday that was put on by the town, some people here, was not a bad event. I think, as you guys are thinking about how you're listening and hearing the community, might be a good opportunity to talk to them more, hear from them more. That being said, as I shared with many of the folks that were at the meeting yesterday, and I'll share with you guys, I think everybody's in a really tough spot right now, and I've talked to many of you one-on-one about the tough spot that the town's in and understand the financials that the town is in. I think as we're trying to balance, harmonize, whatever word we want to use about what we want to do moving forward. I was very vocal at the last meeting talking about pilot. My general consensus, just from talking to a lot of people, including many of you sitting up there, is that there's a lot of questions that we still need to answer as a community. Doesn't take away from the fact that I believe that we need to be a pro-business friendly community. Some of you know, David, especially how I feel about finances, and the community as a whole, and we need to do things to encourage developers to come in and want to work with us. That being said, I think there's some challenges that we need to think about. Number one, outside of environmental and parking and everything else, I am very concerned about the tax burden shift. And any financial analysis that this developer is going to put in front of you guys. I think it's extremely important that I think just about everybody here are homeowners, that we do pay taxes here, and there is not a single pilot program in the state of New Jersey that has not shifted tax burden to existing homeowners. That is a fact. You can't argue that. Nobody can. It's true. That's why the pilot exists. That is going to have an impact on people who live here. So when we think about cost of living, people who already live here that may be on fixed income, as taxes go up exponentially for them from the pilot program, we're going to be dealing with issues with affordable housing on the other side of this. That's one. Two, I am not here as the school board, but as somebody who cares about shared services in the valley. I think that as a shared service perspective, we need to have a bigger discussion about this. I don't know if this was mentioned or not, but at 4 stories, we do have an issue with the fire department. That is a fact. I got this confirmed. Mark Bogenizer confirmed it. We don't have a tower. We need to have a tower to go to 4 stories. Without it, the next closest is mutual aid, 25 minutes away. Right, that is a challenge, right? We need to figure that out. I would encourage you guys to think about that a little bit more. And talk to the developer about finding out a way to help out with that. In other pilot programs, developers have pitched in to help fund fire trucks. So that's something that you guys can ask them to do. It has happened. There's already a statute in New Jersey to allow for it to happen. Second, third, one question that I think has come up that I don't have an answer to, and I don't know the answer to it, is regarding affordable housing and what our obligation is with the new bill if it passes. I think that there's a lot of probably, I would call the word misinformation around that's floating. What our ultimate obligation is here. Are we going to be forced to develop this or not? Which I think if you have an answer to that, I would love to understand if that's the case or not, because I think that there's a lot of people concerned if we don't go in this direction or don't start doing something, that we're going to be forced to develop something, which I think is going to make a lot of people upset. So if you can just answer that. And then the fourth piece I would say is back to this financial analysis from Mr. Albert. We want to encourage this, but I cannot say it enough. Please, 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 like ask him for this stuff early before the application process. And we have a right to do that. We make the rules in this. So we can say to him anything we want right now. And you guys can really set the stage. We don't have to be anti-business here. I'm the biggest business guy, pro-business guy that you're gonna find, right? But we can ask him for things that right now we want to see from him that are going to talk about impact. Right, impact on all the things that I think a lot of people are concerned about. So I know you guys are in a tough spot. I'll continue to say it. I shared with the group at the church last night that the more that we can talk, I think the better we're gonna be. And I am not jealous of any of the position you guys are in. It's tough. I just hope that we can continue to work together and talk about it. So thank you. And if you can answer the question about the affordable housing, I would love to.
Well, I can give you a couple answers and you'll get a lot better answers from our professionals.
Yeah.
A month from now, but so 2 things. So I don't know what the new numbers are gonna, I'll back up a little bit. I mean, we talked about this the last time, and I'll talk about it again because it's so complicated.
Yeah.
So there are these multiple rounds, right, where what was the Council on Affordable Housing would determine what your obligation was, I think, for a 10-year cycle.
Yeah.
And so there's the obligation of what's called the unmet need that was determined previously.
Okay.
Irrespective of the new numbers that are coming out sometime this month, I believe. And so our unmet need right now, according to Joanna Slagle, our planner, is 101 units.
Okay.
And that's just a function of, I mean, we've been trying for years every little apartment we can get here and there,
Yeah.
everything we can do with planning board, it's not because we weren't trying,
Yeah.
it's not because we didn't want it.
Yeah.
It's just very difficult to do, piecemeal. So then there's the second question is, well, can somebody force you to build something, right? Well, and actually the question that precipitated this last time was somebody said, well, is there a timeline of this? Well, my understanding is there isn't. And by the way, so it's 101 plus whatever else gets
Sure.
added on in this next
Yeah.
court mandated decision. So at that point, you get that number and you put together an updated, a fair share housing plan that says, here's what our, and there's an analysis that Joanna will do, a vacant land analysis, like whatever their number is, you then look at what's actually developable and it's. Let professionals do that, but at any rate, it'll be some number, but we know we have 101 now.
Okay.
There is a risk, it's hard to gauge of what's called a builder's remedy lawsuit, right? And we talked about that last meeting, and again, this is something that's better described by someone else, but it functions like this. That if a town is essentially not meeting their affordable housing obligation, when I say not meeting, it doesn't mean they didn't meet that number, it means they're not. I think the courts look at this, as I understand it, are you making a good faith effort to make those numbers?
Sure.
Right, it may be that we'll never create that
Yeah.
101 units, but the question is, when these opportunities arrive, are you taking
Fine.
advantage of them, right? And we've always looked at this on council, and then I'll back up and I'll explain what a builder's remedy lawsuit is. So a builder comes in and the builder says, I want to build X number of units of inclusionary housing, and 15% of that would be affordable housing. And let's just throw a number, I mean, they said, I want to build 1,000 units and I'll make 150 affordable units, and the town says, well, no, we don't want anything that big. I mean, this is what would typically happen in what they call greenfields. And if the town did not have an approved fair share housing plan that they were actually acting on, the builder could then go to a judge and say, this town is basically practicing exclusionary zoning. I'm offering them an opportunity to create affordable housing. They're not letting me do it. And the judge has the authority basically to step in, essentially supersede the authority of the planning board and impose a solution. Now, for many years, that was usually in the context of greenfields, farm fields. And it's, as you know better than probably anybody in this room, the relationship between, school costs and property taxes, right? I mean, there's this perverse incentive for people to want to have big houses with very few children and pay a lot of taxes and not bring kids into the school system, which, mitigates against affordable housing. Okay. For many years, again, that was mostly a greenfield thing, big farm fields. In the last decade or so, people that know about this tell us that, well, now they're looking at infilling, they're looking at opportunities. So with us, infilling is what we would think of as in terms of redevelopment. So there is some risk. It's hard to know how great that risk is.
Sure.
What our advice has been from our professionals is, I put it this way, should we ever come under the microscope? Should a judge be looking at us? The judge is going to look at our record and say, has Hopewell Borough made a good faith effort to meet their affordable housing opportunities when they can?
Yep.
So the critical part of that is, if we have an opportunity to make a big dent, which
Make sure
in this
we do.
case we would, because not only would it be, if we had 128 units, which is what would be possible in that density, that works out to 128 units, 26 units of affordable housing. If it's done under redevelopment, there's a 50% bonus where it actually counts for 50% more towards your obligations, and now you're at 49.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, it's hard to know the risk, but one of the things we have to think about is if we had an opportunity to do it and you didn't take that opportunity,
That's right.
then what happens when we're under the microscope? So, and I'm always qualifying this because I don't want to be this doomsday thing of, oh boy, if we don't do this, if we don't follow this plan, the world's gonna end. That's fear mongering stuff. Don't do that. But what everybody tells us is, it's a risk, it's hard to gauge, but the main thing is, are you making a good faith effort to create affordable, to meet your obligations where you can? So long-winded answer,
Okay,
but that's.
helpful. And I think for the public, I mean, there's a lot of conversation about if we don't do something now, are they acting now because we're afraid we're gonna get forced into it? I'm not hearing anything saying that we're gonna get forced into doing something. I mean.
Well, the thing is, if you have a builder's remedy lawsuit,
Correct.
if that happens, you could be forced into something that has more units than what we're talking about.
But in the context of this development, if we go about it the way that you just described, I would imagine that most judges are gonna see that in good faith, we are trying to do what we're doing if we move forward with this, and there's not going to be some judge that shows up and says, planning board,
Right.
we're superseding your power, therefore we're gonna force you to do something, which I think there's a concern in the public that that's the case. I'm hearing that's a very unlikely scenario, which is a net good thing.
Well, and the thing is, right, and I mean, and again, it's hard, there's no hard and fast aspects of this.
Sure.
If you, people say, you know, like I said, it's risk, the idea is do the best you can, and that's always what we've done.
Yeah, sure.
Um,
I'll leave you guys with this. I think there's such an opportunity. I'm sorry, I know, I talked too much with you, sorry.
5 minutes has been up for.
Yeah. It's my fault, I'm the one who's running out.
Yeah, I'm blaming David. Thank you, guys. I know it's tough. I would just encourage us, please, if we don't have to go fast, there's like a great opportunity right now to get a lot of people who all disagree with all of each other on a million different issues, which is a really fun thing to do, is disagree and talk, like we should be able to do as a community. But let's all just sit down and talk and try to figure it out, because I think that we can come to a consensus about what works, and it's gonna be helpful, and overall, it'll be good.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
I'm sorry, David Wallman again. Just, you might want to make a note to ask the experts. I understand from a woman who held up about a 90-something page document last night that there's proposed legislation in the pipeline to give a remedy to the builder's remedy. And that might be very interesting. In other words, the builder's remedy is not something that we have to live in terror of being invoked. There's legislation in the pipeline to give exemptions and waivers of the builder's remedy to municipalities that have certain justification. I haven't got a copy of the proposed legislation. It's about 90 pages. Does anyone else remember last
It
night's
was
meeting?
Cindy Friedman who had
yes,
the copy of it.
Yeah, so it's something that we should look at, and maybe by next month's meeting, maybe know about that.
So as I understand it, and again, I say that all the time, but if you have an approved fair share housing plan and you're acting on it, you're not vulnerable to a builder lawsuit. We're waiting to find out what our new numbers are going to be. And that's the real animal, then complete the draft plan that he's working on. We had to kind of figure out where things were going in town with a couple of properties, but that's, so in other words, not everybody is vulnerable to a builder's remedy lawsuit. If you basically have a plan, I guess in this case complies with what the court ordered formula is going to be.
Right.
Whether or not you've created all those units, but you have a plan that's compliant, I think that's the term, and you're acting on it and making a good effort, then my understanding is you're not vulnerable.
And all I'm saying is that there might be nuances of that in this new thing in the pipeline that we should probably be aware of. It could be a timing issue that it's so far down the road that we don't get the benefit of it or whatever.
And developers love building lawsuits because it's this cudgel they can hold over towns maybe for years. There was
It's the Damocles sword. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
If we want to make comments in between meetings, who do we send those to?
Oh, you can email the borough administrator or Reggie, and they'll share the comments with the rest of us.
And on the contact us page of the website, Doug Walker.
Okay, any other? Do we need to?
Lowered his hand.
So he had his hand up for a while.
Richard Friedman, you would still like to ask your question. I see you lowered your hand, but if you want to raise your hand, we're happy to take your question now. But he might not be there anymore.
Maybe his question was asked by somebody here.
I feel like that might have been
Yes.
the situation. Okay.
Thought you would bring Brian back?
Yes. Wait, motion to close.
Motion to close.
Motion to close.
I'll motion.
Second.
Okay.
All right,
All in favor?
all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Brian.
Wicked much.
Brian probably drank the water.
Right, moving on to item 9 on the agenda, minutes, we've got. 3 minutes from 3 meetings in our packets. Happily, and just be easier to take these separately because we have different groups of people who were here. So I'd take a motion first for the regular executive session for the September 5th meeting. In a second,
I'll second.
any discussion or changes? All right, all in favor? Opposed, abstained? Thank you. Next, the September 25th, 24th special meeting. Take a motion for minutes of that.
Motion.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained? All right, thank you. Next, we got the first of several first readings of ordinances that will be up for discussion at our next monthly meeting in November. The first ordinance 889. Reggie, if you could read by that.
An ordinance to provide for and determine a schedule of minimum and maximum salaries for officers and employees of the Borough of Hopewell, County of Mercer, New Jersey.
This ordinance is the start of our regular process to adjust salaries for everyone. It's a 2-part process. First, the 2 parts of the ordinance. So we'll introduce it and then have a discussion hearing and set the ranges next month. And then our personnel committee will meet in the interim and discuss actual changes for individual positions within those ranges, which would be done by resolution. So this part sets the ranges, moves them up a bit, so we can enact, raises for folks that need them. Any questions before I take a motion on that? All right, for a motion to introduce 891. Sarah, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All right.
Ms. Hook?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yeah.
Ms. McCullough? Ms. Sealer?
Yes.
Ms. Williams?
Yes.
All right, next, first reading ordinance 890.
Capital ordinance to authorize the replacement of well bore pump and materials in the amount of $25,150 and to authorize the water main service repairs at 11 East Broad Street in the amount of $24,425 and the expenditure of $35,000 from the Water Utility Capital Improvement Fund and of $14,575 from the Water Utility Fund balance for the financing thereof.
My rough understanding of this one, these are capital items that the borough has done over the recent months, and this action will allow us to more or less pay ourselves back from capital funds for these projects. Okay, does that sound about right?
Yeah, no, it is, because, and part of it, I guess, was, we had other capital ordinances that had a balance remaining in them, and part of this is taking advantage of those to essentially shift that money to the things that we needed to do this year. So it was cash, in effect, or, assets that we had, that we needed to make available. So this is a formal way of doing that.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second,
Ms. Hook?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
yes.
Ms. McCullough?
Yes.
Ms. Sealer?
Yes.
Ms. Williams?
All right, the next first reading is on ordinance 891. This is one that I would hand over the gavel to David to for introduction. I'll step outside. So it's one of those.
Yep.
Complete.
I'll read it.
Explanation of the ordinance of the change.
The ordinance of the Borough Council of the Borough of Hopewell, County of Mercer, State of New Jersey, establishing the F-M-F multifamily redevelopment overlay zone, amending chapter 12 zoning, article 21 zone district regulations.
Okay. So this is a, excuse me, amendment or modification to our existing redevelopment ordinance. And it was crafted following the special meeting that we had a couple of weeks ago. Much of which was focused on the question of whether to change the maximum height requirement and allow potential for 4-story structures. With the idea that having a 4-story structure toward the rear of the property or the eastern part of the property, but not fronting on the street, would allow for a smaller scale development along the buildings that front on the street.
Right.
And so it expands the overall height limitation from 3 stories to 4, and allows for just a couple of notes. Where is it? There it is. Okay. Maximum height of building, which was previously 3.5 stories and 45 feet. The maximum height is now 4 stories and 55 feet. The 55 feet, I believe, takes into account the height of elevators and other structures related to. There's an additional section, and I just gave Reggie a slight change in language to it, but you know, the intention of this change wasn't just to change the height across the entire site. The intention was to change the height so that you could have higher buildings in the rear and essentially, you know, a lower profile on the street. So, you know, we spoke with Joanna and Tara, our attorney, and we looked at ways of crafting this. So essentially, it has a building placement requirement that says buildings with frontage along Hamilton Avenue and Lafayette Street should be limited to 3 stories or 38 feet, which is basically what was proposed previously to be sensitive to the existing residential land uses. Buildings with a height greater than 3 stories or 38 feet, and that's the language that's greater than 3 stories, 30 language that just changed, shall be located along Somerset Street and along the rear, that is eastern property line of block 18, lot 1 to visually reduce the scale. So that's the provision that essentially says that you can't have a 4-story building fronting on Lafayette or Hamilton Street is essentially the purpose of that.
Right.
Then there was another, it's really a minor change and it's not really substantive in terms of having any real effect, but under the stormwater provisions, that was reworded at the request or at the recommendation of the borough engineer. And it was just simplifying the language and essentially saying the project will be designed to meet the NJDEP stormwater management rules applicable at the time of submittal of the site plan application and the borough code. So all it's really saying is whatever the rules are that are in effect at the time the site plan is submitted for stormwater, those are the rules that apply. And then additionally, it says wherever practical stormwater management facilities shall be designed for ease of maintenance and utilize green infrastructure measures that serve as an aesthetic landscape amenity to the development. And that's essentially what was in the old language. It's just stated differently. But essentially what it's doing is just restating the fact that the state and local rules in effect at the time of the application shall apply. There's really nothing else changed. And those are the 2 changes. So with that,
All motion?
or does anyone have any
No,
questions?
sorry.
No?
No, they are straightforward.
No.
So you
All
vote?
motion?
Okay, I'll throw your second.
I'll second.
Second, thank you.
Ms. Hook?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yes,
Ms. McCullough?
Yes.
Ms. Steeler?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis?
Yes.
all right, thank you. Let Ryan out of his booth. There we go.
All right, next item 13, we've got 2 resolutions, 100 cancellation of capital balance and 101 authorization for pedestrian safety signage. I'll note, Krista's not here tonight, but the request in 101 was kind of a budget allocation from the pedestrian and bicycle safety advisory committee to have some additional stop for pedestrian in the middle of road signs budgeted for purchase. And resolution 100 is a administrative one of kind of cleaning up capital balances for bond ordinances that were done, but either completed projects or projects that were not done as anticipated, so the funds can be returned and essentially, I'm gonna say cleaned up is the right word, but administratively revised.
Was that the same one that we just kind of approved where we paid for something then moving money around?
Well, the ordinance does that, I guess, proactively for new projects. The resolution is kind of for old projects that are done to allow either the change to go back or for projects that are not. We had a few things that were, let's just say older projects that just didn't proceed as planned, but we had done the bonds for.
Okay.
Right.
So just to clarify, the pedestrian, like those signs that literally go in the middle right by a
Yes.
crosswalk?
Yes, yes.
And everyone keeps running over.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you can only see them. I just, yeah.
Hit them. I wonder, hopefully they're making them more durable.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest with you, I guess the current design, there's one on Eggy near my house that gets hit
I
quite
was gonna
often.
say, that's what it's always.
But, you go and pick it up and put the sign back and
Yeah.
it survives. I guess it's meant to accept the impact and be,
Yes.
I've been hit hundreds of times in the last couple of
Yeah.
years, so.
Maybe they should make a self-riding one. Just,
Leave alone.
Or one that when it pops back up, could put like a sticker on the back of the
Yeah.
car that hit it. It's done, so.
Or a
attractive.
camera.
Yes.
The camera, tack it, yeah.
With that, unless there are any questions, I'd entertain a motion for resolutions 2024-100 through 101.
So move.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Samara, thank you.
Ms. Hook?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yeah.
Ms. McCullough?
Yes.
Ms. Steeler?
Yeah.
Ms. Williams?
Yes.
All right, next item, we received from our auditors, the 2023 audit. What's always nice to see is when there's not a
Findings.
no findings or negative or any management letter, so it's hats off to our CFO and team for 2023, which particularly was challenging. As we were between administrators for a good chunk of it. So hats off to everyone who let us set through flying colors administratively. We have to accept this by motion, but I would certainly entertain one if there are questions. I'm certainly not able to answer them, but we can get them back to Doug or our financial
Like reading
team.
there.
Yeah.
I'll motion.
I'll second.
All right.
Would you roll call this one? Or?
Who seconded that one? Was it-
I think Heidi.
Oh,
I-
that's all right, it's not okay.
If you're better out of my right ear.
That's okay.
Ms. Hook?
Remember that.
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yes.
Ms. McCullough?
Yes.
Ms. Steeler? Ms. Williams?
Yes.
All right, next I'll entertain a motion to approve the claims for payment.
I'll move.
I'll second.
Any questions or comment before we do roll call? Right,
Ms. Hook?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yeah.
Ms. McCullough?
Yes.
Ms. Steeler?
Yeah.
Ms. Williams?
Yes.
all right, we'll move into our liaison reports. Mary, you wanna start?
Sure. So the Board of Health for the township, Pennington Borough, and Hopewell Borough had their joint, meeting on September 17th at Pennington Borough Hall. We heard from the Greater Mercer Public Health Partnership at that meeting, who recently conducted a community health needs assessment earlier this year. The number one need that came back that was pretty high up on the list, past the others, was mental health. And then the next four that were identified by community members were cancer, affordable housing, diabetes, and obesity. So they are having their community health planning program, I guess, tomorrow. And so that is compiled of their community advisory board members, health professionals, volunteers, nonprofits, people in higher ed, and other people working with the organization to study the priority results and then to create action plans that are measurable, that we can actually implement in our communities in Hopewell Valley. So it was a really interesting, a really good meeting and a great speaker at that meeting. We also heard from Heidi Kame with the Hopewell Valley Municipal Alliance, which I'm sure is in someone else's report, so I won't go too much into that. A reminder for Board of Health, and the next Board of Health meeting for the borough is October 30th. It'll be here. That'll be the last one for this calendar year. And the next reminder as well, vote and vax will be on November 5th here at Borough Hall from 10 to 1. That's just flu shots, not COVID boosters, but they will have flu shots, but it's free. And Open Space Advisory did not meet since the last meeting, but our next scheduled meeting is October 15th, so next week. And that will be in person for the first time since pre-COVID, I think, at the Hopewell Township Municipal Building. So I have.
Can I ask a question? I have a board health question, which might not be, it's really weird and it might not be appropriate, but,
That's always a good way to start.
yes. Good way to hear.
It's more of a health question.
It's about dog waste disposal.
Mhm.
Because apparently, according to DPW, people are putting them into the leaf collection bags.
Oh.
Right, it's as gross as it sounds, so
Oh, man.
they're,
Oh, and then it goes into.
yes, all of it, all of it. So that Alan doesn't have to pick them out, so I'm wondering if there, like, who would send something out saying, please don't do that?
Well, so we did one of the mandatory ordinances that we kind of fumbled through in the spring. Did give, I mean, I don't know, if we have a big enforcement army to do it, but that is a actionable offense now. Under our ordinances, so we can maybe look at who can enforce that, or maybe educate the board
Yeah,
about
put
it.
out a, something easier for people to see than the word, like, yeah, I think that we could talk to.
Include something in the email.
Yeah.
Social blast combo.
Yeah,
Throughout this meeting house still struggles with that too. They even put bags up at that little, walkway against the fence on Broad Street. People are just notorious for having their dogs go there. They won't even bother to pick up. It's a problem in town.
but for this issue, maybe Samara, if you could talk to, it's health, I guess, so if you talk to the health officer, maybe and get a paragraph, and if there's, maybe they have some nice materials, but we can,
I'm talking.
blast them out and figure out if we need a dialogue about who, I'm not that comfortable, have a lot of resources for enforcement, but we do have a kind of shiny new ordinance with fines for it, so maybe that would be enough
I
to.
think we need surveillance cameras. There's probably
There's a
like.
lot of big cameras out there.
I know, I'm just saying, like, I wanna see the person who goes, yeah, this is a good place to put this, I'll put it in somebody's yard waste bag. That's
As long as no one's suggesting a Hopewell-wide pet waste DNA registry.
Right.
Community associations,
Can I say one more thing? Just what I mentioned this before, the Board of Health or the Health Department at the township, who we share services with, is still understaffed and working a ton. So to be patient with them, I think they've been doing excellent at getting back whenever I have to call the health officer with something very quick, but he did mention that at the joint meeting, and he's mentioned it in our previous meetings since he's come on board as well. So to be aware if they're working to hire, they did lose a position that was funded by a grant very recently. So I just wanted to put that out there too, that they are working really hard for us.
Thank you. Do the outside in methods, or how do you want to go next?
Sure, EDC has actually struggled to achieve quorum again, so we will be meeting, we did not meet in September, but we will be meeting in October. And the green team is meeting this Thursday, so, the one thing that I am working with the Hopewell Borough part of the green team to try to get the farmer's market date. We still need one more volunteer to be able to. I'm hoping for November 3rd, if we can just get one more volunteer. So I will have one next month.
Deb?
So the Recreation Committee, will start up again in 2025, working on the annual flyer of events. Library Board, the next meeting is October 10th at Borough Hall. There are lots of great events, obviously being planned by our wonderful librarians. Please sign up for their emails or check out their social media pages. I believe they're having a bake sale, which is one of their main fundraisers during the Porch Fest that's coming up. So if you can stop by, that'd be great. And the borough in its capacity as landlord has been working on various improvements and repairs with the library building itself. The building committee, restoration training station is expected to be completed. I think it was October 27th, something like that. It's been pushed back a little bit. I think that's in Doug's report. The second grant was obviously received from the New Jersey Historic Trust to pay for the restoration. And that's great news. And then we have a meeting with Francois, which unfortunately I will not be able to attend, to discuss the installation of the generous gift to the borough, the train panels that will be installed along the train tracks. That's it.
Sure.
My report is very brief because my timing is off. So fire department, emergency medical is meeting Wednesday, so I'm like 1 month off. Things are good. Always looking for new volunteers. Senior advisory board took the summer off, so our next meeting is also Wednesday, but there's always ongoing events, and check their website. And Shade Tree just continues planting trees, although apparently it hasn't rained and you need a pickaxe to even dig into the ground an inch. So planting, we have trees, just can't plant.
Yeah, need rain.
Thank you, David.
A couple of things, we just today received an inspection report from the Pittsburgh Tank and Tower Company, which had done an evaluation of our reservoir up on North Star Avenue. And this was, they basically put cameras in there and did a complete inspection of the site. So our reservoir is basically mostly underground, 230,000 tank. Which is about 110 years old, and it's cement line brick, as I understand it. So we knew that we had some leakage from the tank. We were looking at options as to whether we would have to replace the tank or whether it could be repaired. This particular company has I guess a proprietary process where they spray some sort of a polymer that actually lines the inside of the tank and can actually be used to flood leaks, which we were very excited to hear that. Unfortunately, in this particular, and their determination was, I think that process wouldn't really be applicable here, and their recommendation was to replace the tank. So it's part of our process of looking at the options. This was not the news we wanted to have, but we needed to know what the option was. The hope was that there might have been a short-term fix short of replacing a tank at an estimated cost of $1.1 million. So that's not good news. And there'll be more discussion, I guess, on the committee about that. We are still, as I mentioned earlier, we're awaiting a grant agreement from the NJDEP for the grant that we've been awarded for the treatment systems for 2 wells. And meanwhile, are in the process of pulling together what information we can we need to craft once we get that grant agreement, work on a request for proposal for engineering firms to do the design and planning for that project, which is a pretty extensive process because it's not just the design and planning of the engineering of the treatment systems, it's all the permitting and regulatory stuff that goes with it, which is particularly complex in the case of well number 6, which is in Hopewell Borough Park. Because it's next to a stream corridor, so it triggers all sorts of complicated rules. It's also on property which was part of using Green Acres funding, which triggers even more complicated rules. It's called a diversion. If you're going to take something in an area that was designated for recreational use and use it for something else, which in this case might be creating a building that's 450 or 500 square feet, you have to go through this amazingly onerous process, but at any rate, we'll work all that out, and part of the RFP will be finding somebody with both the technical and regulatory qualifications to do the permitting.
Fun.
And I know, fun never stops. Oh, yes, we had a very nice meeting with representatives from Rocky Hill on September 5th. And it was part of our process of talking to other water departments to find out what's going on, lessons learned, what's their situation in terms of the economics and so on. It was very informative. I mean, they have a system, they're about half our population, about 800 and some people, but half the number of, or actually less than half the number of connections. They got a federal congressional appropriation for, I think it was $1.7 million, which is what they used to fund their PFAS system. And they had a significant issue that had to be addressed. And they have a single well that supplies the town for the most part.
How many houses?
It's about 800 residents. I don't know how many, it's about, I think it's 230
So do they have
connections.
an interconnection then?
They do have an interconnection, but they don't need to use it most of the time.
Okay.
But so one of the questions was, they had a US Department of Agriculture, USDA loan, which they had originally obtained to fund the treatment system, which is a low interest loan. I think it's over 40 years. They, unfortunately, Hopewell Borough, like, Rocky Hill, doesn't meet the income criteria for grants from USDA. Most of these loan programs they look at the household median income, and if you're above a certain threshold, they're happy to provide you with low-interest loans, but the grants are not forthcoming, and that's because they have to basically have them for communities that really need them. So they had a loan that they originally took out to do this work and also some capital improvements, and then they got this congressional appropriation through Cory Booker. So they paid off most of that loan, they still have about $600,000 in debt. But they, because they're a small system, they don't have to do the asset management plan process that we went through, which is where you do an inventory of every single pipe, all of your capital assets, and figure out what your capital is. So they actually don't have a good fix on what their future capital needs are. They know they need to have a backup well because they only have one well. They have water tower that is functional and not leaking but needs repairs. So they, they have and is yet undetermined load of capital projects. In our case, we know what our numbers are, and theirs they don't, but they're getting by for now. Anyway, it was very informative. They were very helpful, and it was a good process. So, we'll talk to a couple of other water departments, Pennington and probably Flemington as well, and just find out what's happening with them and what we can learn and share information. Part of our due diligence on options. And that's it.
Yeah, thank you, David. Couple of things from me, as Deb mentioned, I'm really excited, this week to learn that we received, I guess, we'll call it recommendation, still subject to, legislative approval, but an additional $150,000, for the train station project. If you recall, the initial estimates were about $500,000 of restoration. We got a grant for half of that, and when we got to do the work, it was much more expensive than initially anticipated. So our finance team, kudos to them and our administrator for kind of looking out this plan, but we convinced the State Historic Trust to let us proceed, essentially funding part of the project, and they worked through a grant for a good part of the remaining balance, so we could get the project done before it deteriorated further, and get a good size of the additional funds back to us to complete it. Looking forward to the completion of that, and hopefully a special kind of public welcome back to our David Knight's community room at the train station. I want to thank particularly our administrator and everyone, both just volunteers at the Harvest Fair and the council folks who were in town for a fun day of cotton candy and a new christening a new tent for public events for us. And I have not forgotten, I owe a few people t-shirts here. You'll have them before the end of the week. So that next time we're dishing out cotton candy, it will be in style. This week, I hold mayor's office hours here at Town Hall several times a month. Every other Wednesday, so this Wednesday at 1 o'clock and this Saturday at 9 a.m. This month. So it's this Wednesday, and this is the second Saturday. I tend to bring coffee, but it's almost universally rejected, and I drink 8 cups of coffee. So if I give up on coffee this time, it's just for that reason. On our website, I guess in connection with the Hopewell Inn project, there is a water test happening on Wednesday morning. So from 8 to about 9:30. You may notice some lower water pressure and a little bit of discoloration. There's a note on our website explains what's happening. It doesn't affect the safety in any way, but you may want to delay running the laundry for a few hours till it clears out. The connection will be at the fire hydrant across the street, where they have to test for their fire system. For us here, I'm hoping to have a study that our planner did for our downtown area that will help us perhaps unlock some economic incentives for businesses looking to do things in town. As we mentioned, we'll do our rest of our salary ordinance, which will involve us actually, making some recommendations on the changes in the next month within the new scale. Planning board, meets this Wednesday, and I think it's a good meeting to come to. The master plan reexamination report, which is up on the planning board website, is gonna be reviewed and I suppose voted on with the final public hearing. It's been up there for a while, but if you have comments, take a look at it and bring your questions or comments to the meeting on Wednesday. Those meetings are, you can view them by Zoom, but if you have comments, you should come in person. Those are not yet bi-directional hybrid meetings. To that end, though, our administrator met with our IT consultants to talk about improvements to the room here. Really appreciate everyone's patience as we have more interest in our meetings, and we fill this room on a fairly regular basis. So we'll be looking at upgrades to our audio system, perhaps a more dedicated physical space for people to stand making comments, and with thanks to the Hopewell Valley YMCA for letting us borrow this second screen. We'll be, getting a second one mounted up here more permanently. As Dad mentioned, Porch Fest is this Sunday. Drive carefully and tell me, a lot of people walking around, but between noon and 4, a lot of really exciting things happen in the borough. This Friday is Walk and Roll to School Day. So that meets Friday morning at the train station, and a large group of people with a snazzy police escort will walk the rest of the way to Hopewell Elementary, celebrating our walkable downtown. There's a Veterans Day ceremony at Woolsey Park on the 9th. I'm actually not able to attend this year, so if anyone is able to join the ceremony on behalf of the town, I would appreciate it. Finally, Hopewell Valley Municipal Alliance, I was at their meeting this month, and just a reminder that the Mayor's Breakfast is an event that you can sign up for. It's at the Hopewell Golf Club on the 18th of October. I believe that's a Friday. It's a free event where the mayors from the 3 towns kind of give a little bit of an update on what's happening. It's a great group of people that is assembled. I don't mean the mayors, we're horrible, but the folks who volunteer for the Municipal Alliance. It's a really amazing group of people come together to help with our youth issues. And then possibly for the November meeting, our Buildings and Grounds Committee, or whatever we call it now, has done a lot of work towards some really important upgrades we need to do at our Public Works facility. We're looking to possibly have our architect here next month to start previewing what some of the things we're able to put into the program are.
Get that thing on the street.
Yeah. So with that, I'd like to open up the meeting back to the public for our second public session. First, for those in person, find your way up to the front and we'll recognize you. And while that's happening or not happening, I'll invite anyone online to push the virtual raise hand button. Or if you're on a phone, I suppose it's *9. That's how you raise your hand, I believe. We have one phone-in caller here tonight. Seeing none, I'll let Councilwoman Hook look over my shoulder here, but I don't see any hands raised. So seeing none and no one here coming up to the front, I'd entertain a motion to close the meeting to the public. Oh, sorry.
That's not really a question. Did you?
Wait, if you could come up to the front so we can hear you and the people in
You
Zoom
said
can see it.
online there was a place to make a public comment about upgrading the audio system. Did I hear that right?
So not so much a place online, so much as the borough is working with its consultants to spec out what kind of equipment we need to do it. We have a legacy proprietary analog audio system that's kind of run everywhere that doesn't really work, and to be honest with you, hasn't actually been used maybe in the last decade. So we're looking at ways to kind of salvage some of the copper that we have that runs to, you'll look above you, there's a bunch of speakers there. And we have audio, yes, audio jacks that are home run, as it turns out, to a closet we have in the back. We're hopeful, or at least our consultant is hopeful, that maybe with a mixer, we might be able to get some, particularly in the back of the room, audio amplification. The problem that we're going to run into is that our hybrid system and really good in-room audio amplification aren't that compatible. The more we amplify in-room, the worse our mics and speakers will work for the Zoom people. So there's gonna be once we get some new equipment into the budget, a lot of testing to see. And my suspicion is that we might get some decent amplification into the speakers in the back. But that maybe we turn it down for the front row so that we're not tricking our OWL camera into thinking that someone else is speaking and it can still track us. But we're putting some thought into that and prepping for next year's budget to allocate funds for it.
And you said there's, we can make comment.
Well, feel free, I mean, if you wanna, it's kind of my project, so if you wanna just send me an email, if you have thoughts or wanna particularly what's worked and what hasn't, or if you have ideas about what we can add. The low hanging fruit is probably gonna be a more dedicated, this goes to the planning board as well, so they meet in here. And right now, the room is not really set up for them to have two-way Zoom meetings. So working on a place where there would be a dedicated exhibit place with a camera that would pick it up, so if you're showing a map, the people right now, you know, you kind of wave it in front of the OWL camera, it kind of picks it up, but you don't really see it. So there's some work to be done before we can get there for their meetings, but those would probably result in some improvements. I mean, my personal thought is that you seem quite comfortable standing there, but it's a little awkward to have your back to the room for public comment. So to have a dedicated space where it's easier to address maybe the room and us, you know, we're kind of playing with that as well. So any comments either to our administrator Doug or to myself, happy to take them to, you know, add to the pile.
Yeah, I have a couple.
Well, please, yeah, thank you. So with that, I'll take a motion to close public session.
I'll do a motion.
Second? Yes. All right, David, you won this time, all in favor? Aye. And I will take a motion to adjourn the meeting. Samara, do you have a second? I hope so. Yeah, second, okay, all in favor? All right, thank you, everyone.
By the way, I've been to the mayor's breakfast, and not to say this, we have the best mayor.